Hey guys, tonight we drift back in time. Not just centuries, but millennia, to a place where shadows spoke and the slow drip of water was the voice of the cosmos. We're in ancient Babylon, under a sky so wide it swallows your breath, wrapped in a hush of sand and distant river sounds. Imagine sitting here, cross-legged in the warmth of a flickering fire, soft wind brushing your skin, while the stars above sparkle like scattered grains of salt on black silk. You feel the weight of the night pressing gently around you, and for a moment, there's nothing but stillness. Somewhere in the dark, a night bird calls out, maybe to the moon, maybe just because it can. You shiver, not from cold, but from the sheer quiet of it all. And then you remember, we're here to talk about time. Not the kind your smartwatch nags you about, but time as it was first noticed, tracked, and tamed by human minds using only the tools the earth and sky provided. Now, don't get too comfortable. You probably wouldn't survive in ancient Babylon unless you enjoy 120-degree afternoons, wild dogs, and bathing in river sludge. Just saying. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from tonight. What time is it there anyway? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You just arrived in Babylon. Yes, that Babylon. The Hanging Gardens are somewhere behind you, allegedly still hanging. The Euphrates snakes by like a lazy god, its waters thick with moonlight. A few torches flicker along the streets, their reflections dancing like liquid gold on mud brick walls. You're standing in a courtyard. It smells faintly of cumin, dry straw, and something else you can't place, maybe goat. In the center, there's a simple stone column, barely the height of your waist. Someone has jammed a sharpened stick into its top, and that stick in the moonlight casts a thin, long shadow across the dusty ground. Next to it, crouching and humming tunelessly, is a priest in robes the color of desert dusk. His beard is neatly oiled, and his eyes flick toward you like he's seen a lot of night visitors, and most of them didn't bother listening. Late, he mutters, not looking at you. Your shadow's already halfway home. You learn quickly that this man, who never actually tells you his name, is one of the Sadamu, a temple timekeeper. His job is to track the hours using that very shadow you almost tripped over. And yes, he's been doing this since before your great-grandparents' great-grandparents were shadows themselves. The tool he uses is called a gnomon, basically a fancy word for a stick that casts a shadow. But in Babylon, it wasn't just a stick. It was a sacred pointer, an ancient compass of light and angle. You see, the Babylonians believed that time flowed like the river, steady, powerful, and divine. So they watched the sun every single day, marking its arc like a celestial stopwatch. When the sun hit that high point, when shadows shrank into themselves and disappeared beneath the gnomon's base, it was noon. Sacred noon. And trust me, if you were off by even a few degrees, the gods didn't exactly send you a gentle reminder. More like a bad harvest, or worse, an angry king. Now here's something wild. Some historians still debate whether Babylonian sundials were vertical or horizontal. Seems like a small thing, right? But imagine using the wrong type. It's like trying to microwave soup with the door open. Doesn't end well. The priest stands, his knees cracking like ancient scrolls. He picks up a smooth slate, etched with tiny wedge marks, cuneiform, the written heartbeat of the empire. He jots something down while you watch, fascinated. You can't read a single symbol, but you know he's recording time. Not just tracking it, recording it. As if the shadow's movement mattered not only today, but tomorrow and next year and forever. You start noticing things. How the shadow inched forward every minute. How small clay markers sit along the dial's edge. Sunrise, 3rd hour, high sun, 9th hour, dusk. They didn't have 2 p.m., but they had rhythms. The kind you can feel in your bones. Oh, and here's your quirky tidbit of the night. Some Babylonian priests believe your shadow held your soul's outline. So if you stood in the wrong place at the wrong time, you could accidentally lend your soul to a ritual. Which is a super fun thought while standing under a giant ziggurat with weird incense in the air. Anyway, you're starting to feel the gravity of this place. Not just historical gravity, but the weight of time itself. You realize these people weren't guessing. They didn't say around lunch or whenever the crops looked thirsty. They had systems. They had hours. And yet, no clocks. Just shadows. And water. But that's for tomorrow's lesson. Tonight, as the priest folds up his tablet and the stars blink lazily above, you sit back on your heels and stare at the gnomon again. The stick, the stone, the shadow. It's moving almost imperceptibly, but it is moving. And somehow, that's more magical than any glowing screen you've ever held. You're back in the courtyard before dawn, the air's still cool and dry. It smells like burnt olive oil and morning dust. Somewhere a rooster gives a half-hearted croak. It's probably as tired as you are. The city is barely beginning to stir. But one figure is already awake. The priest. He's there again, robed slightly less neat than last night, but with the same sharp gaze. He nods at you without speaking, and then gestures toward the stick, the gnomon from yesterday. Watch, he says simply. The first rays of sunlight stretch over the rooftops like sleepy fingers, brushing against the stone pillar. And then, slowly, like a cat slinking into view, the shadow returns. It stretches longer and longer across the dirt courtyard, creeping like time itself. This is the moment the priest loves. You can tell from the way he watches. Reverent, focused. He's not just measuring light, he's measuring meaning. Because in Babylon, when a shadow reaches a certain point, it tells you more than just the hour. It tells you when to open the gates, when to pray, when the markets should shout alive, and when the palace should hush. You crouch beside the gnomon, tracking its growing reach. Around the base, you notice faint carvings, small lines radiating out like a child's sun drawing. Each line represents a fixed moment, a slice of morning. A whole life of ritual is wrapped around this pointy little stick. And here's the kicker. The Babylonians didn't invent this idea from scratch. They inherited it from the Sumerians, and maybe even from older cultures whose shadows had long since vanished. That's one of the truths that doesn't always make the textbooks. Timekeeping isn't about invention. It's about observation over generations. The priest lays down a thin strip of polished copper near the shadow. As the light sharpens, the shadow's edge moves across it with visible clarity. This isn't crude guesswork. It's precision. The kind of precision you'd expect from someone trying to keep a God schedule. Because they were. Each hour is sacred, the priest murmurs. Each one has a name, a color, a breath. You think he's being poetic. But later, you find out some Babylonian priest genuinely assigned symbolic meanings to each part of the day. Morning hours might belong to Shamash, god of the sun and justice. Afternoon, perhaps Marduk, the supreme god. Even today, historians still debate whether these hours had set names or just divine associations. And trust me, the arguments get weirdly passionate. Some of those clay tablets were basically ancient comment sections. Now here's a little curveball for you. Quirky tidbit incoming. The length of a Babylonian hour wasn't fixed. Unlike our neat 60-minute system, their hours flexed with the seasons. Summer hours stretched out lazily like a sunbather, while winter hours scurried by like they had somewhere else to be. Imagine telling someone you'll meet them in 3 hours, only for that to mean wildly different things in July and December. Babylonian time was vibes-based and, honestly, kind of poetic. The priest scratches something onto another clay tablet with his stylus, not bothering to brush the dust from his robe. He seems to be timing how fast the shadow moves between 2 marks. You ask what he's writing. He replies with a grunt. But later you learn he's noting the interval between sunrise and third shadow. Not a fixed number of minutes, but a physical change in space. How far the shadows stretched. That's how time felt to them. Not digital ticks, but shifts in the light around you. Suddenly, he gestures for you to move. You shuffle sideways, awkwardly, only to realize your body is casting its own shadow onto the dial. Oops. Major time crime. He grumbles, and you apologize. But he actually smiles a little. Happens all the time, he says, shrugging. Especially with pigeons. And that's your dry joke for the hour. Some of the earliest interruptions in recorded timekeeping? Flocks of birds. But then he gets serious. Because in Babylon, shadow tracking wasn't just about knowing when to water your onions. It was tied into something deeper, cosmic order. The Babylonians believed the universe operated on a fixed, divine schedule. And if you didn't honor that schedule, well, bad things happened. Crops failed. Floods came. You got metaphorically, and occasionally literally, smited. Now, let's clear something up. While shadow time was sacred, it wasn't exclusive to temples. Merchants used it. Farmers used it. Even builders sometimes scheduled stone laying based on the position of the sun. The city ran not just on barley and bricks, but on light and shadow, which is kind of beautiful when you think about it. The priest stands, stretches, and eyes the shadow again. It's now grazing the edge of a small stone, probably marking mid-morning. He nods, satisfied. Someone nearby rings a tiny bell. It sounds thin and distant, but purposeful. The city is waking, and the timing has been declared. You sit back on a warm rock, letting the sun touch your skin. There's no ticking, no buzzing, just you, the sky, the earth, and a stick. And it's working. This was time. And for people who didn't have clocks, didn't have watches, didn't have even a concept of 9:15 sharp, the Babylonians were doing just fine. Later in the day, after the sun has climbed to a height that makes shadows shrink into tight little puddles under every rooftop, you find yourself still in the temple complex. The heat hums through the courtyard stones, and your tunic, yes, you're definitely wearing a tunic now, is sticking to your back. The air is thick, buzzing faintly with the sound of flies and the sleepy muttering of priests sheltering in the shade. Somewhere nearby, someone is chanting in slow syllables that rise and fall like breath. You're not here for the chanting, though. You're here to watch what happens when the shadow knows the hour. This time, the gnomon isn't in the courtyard. It's perched atop a tall clay platform, basically a giant sundial disc. Up here, the light is purer, harsher, and the shadow cast by the gnomon is sharp as a blade, slicing across carefully carved lines radiating from the center. A few apprentice scribes, teenagers with overgrown curls and dusty fingers, are gathered around the edge, whispering and pointing. One of them glances at you. Almost third hour, he says in a tone that makes it sound like a minor miracle. And indeed, as the shadow touches a particular wedge in the circular layout, a low bronze gong rings from inside the temple. Not loud, more like a suggestion than a command. That sound, that faint metal note, is a signal, one that ripples out beyond the temple walls. In a market, somewhere, a woman selling fish begins packing up her morning stall. In a classroom tucked behind a row of fig trees, a tutor switches topics from writing to counting. And in the palace, a royal scribe takes a new clay tablet from his stack. Time to turn a corner. The sundial you're looking at isn't just a scientific tool. It's an organizer of the city's heartbeat, a public timekeeper. And here's something that might surprise you. The Babylonians didn't use one unified time system for everyone. The temples had their own calendars, often tied to astrology and rituals. The palace used a different system, focused on administrative tasks. Farmers? They followed the seasons and the stars. It was like several time zones stacked on top of each other, without any of them knowing the others existed. Historians still debate how standardized this all was. Some believe there was a master timekeeper, an ultimate high priest who coordinated everything like a divine scheduler. Others argue it was more localized, more chaotic, and kind of jazz-like. Improvised, but somehow still harmonious. Meanwhile, the apprentice scribes are arguing over something. One of them insists the shadow passed the line too early. Another says it's right on time. You lean in to listen. They're debating gnomon angle error, which, yes, is a real thing. The angle of the stick can slightly shift depending on the season, the moisture in the clay, or even whether some lazy goat knocked it over the day before. These kids are calculating with twine, clay markers, and, honestly, more drama than a modern group chat. One of them dramatically declares, "The gods disapprove of your sloppy markings." It's a whole scene. And here's your quirky fact of the section. There was once a famous Babylonian scribe who insisted you could hear the shadow moving if you listen hard enough. His nickname? Ear of Time. Possibly a poet. Definitely a bit much. But it speaks to something real, the idea that time wasn't just tracked by sight, but by sensation. A shadow didn't just point to an hour. It felt different at different times. Mid-morning had a softness. Noon had a silence. Evening's shadow stretched with a kind of melancholy. You didn't need to look. You could feel time grazing against your skin. There's a reason they use circle for their dials, not grids or squares. To the Babylonians, time flowed. It curved. It was part of the motion of the heavens. Not chopped into equal chunks, but rolled forward like the sun itself. One of the scribes drops a small pebble onto a line and nods. He says it's a lucky hour. You raise an eyebrow. Apparently, some hours were better than others for different tasks. The third shadow might be good for reading omens. The ninth shadow might be a bad time to travel. Superstitions? Maybe. Or maybe just centuries of careful observation turned into rule-of-thumb wisdom. You sit back on the warm platform and let the moment sink in. You've never felt time pass like this before. No beep, no bus, just a long, silent movement across stone. Somehow, it feels more real than any secondhand tick ever did. And while we're here, let's acknowledge something. You'd be terrible at this job. Seriously, imagine telling your boss, "I'm late because my shadow was off by a finger's width." Not gonna fly, but in Babylon, they got it. They respected the nuance. The new time had texture. As the sun continues its climb, the shadow pulls tighter and tighter, like a thread winding itself inward. By noon, it will be almost gone, huddled at the base of the gnomon. And that, in itself, is a sacred moment. A moment when shadow disappears and the light reigns alone. But that's coming soon. For now, you watch as the last bit of morning peels away, marked not by numbers on a screen, but by a moving shadow, a humming priest, in a city that somehow just knows what hour it is. You close your eyes, you feel the sun, and you understand time doesn't have to tick. Sometimes it can glide. By the time you make your way back down from the sundial platform, the sun is nearly overhead. The heat now has weight. It presses on your shoulders like a thick wool blanket someone forgot to take off the fire. Even the breeze, when it comes, feels like someone exhaling into your face after sipping hot tea. In the distance, a donkey groans like it's reconsidering its entire existence. But the priest doesn't slow. He's already moved on, leading you around the back of the temple complex, past tall walls of mud brick that smell of baked clay and faint incense. You follow in his footsteps, watching the glint of sweat on the nape of his neck and the dark marks left by his sandals in the dust. He stops beside what looks like a shallow depression in the ground, lined with worn stone. It's nothing fancy, just a low basin, round and wide, shaded by an overhanging cloth stretched between two poles. A single jug sits beside it, and from the spout, water drips. Slowly, rhythmically, plop, plop, plop. This, he says, without any ceremony, is a clepsydra. And just like that, you're introduced to the other half of Babylonian timekeeping, the water clock. Now, if the sundial was for show, the public face of time, this little dripping basin is its quieter, nerdier sibling. The clepsydra doesn't need the sun. It doesn't cast shadows. It just counts drops. Here's how it works. Water is poured into the jug, which has a small hole near the bottom. As the water drains out, it drips into the stone basin below. Lines etched along the inside wall of the basin mark how high the water has risen. More water equals more time passed. It's simple genius and surprisingly reliable, at least in theory. And yes, historians still debate whether Babylonian clepsydras measured time as it filled up or emptied down. The priest here seems to believe in the filling version. He watches the rising water level like a hawk watching prey. Every dozen or so drops. He makes a quick scratch on a clay tablet beside him. You sit down beside him in the shade, grateful for even this thin scrap of shelter. The sound of the water plopping into the basin is hypnotic. It's like the world's oldest metronome, steady and patient, whispering. There's no rush. There's never been a rush. The priest, seeing your curious expression, nods toward the jug. 1 jar, he says, is 1 hour? Unless it's cracked. Then it's half an hour and a lot of yelling. That's your dry humor dose for the section. And here's your quirky tidbit. Some Babylonian priests flavored the water. Not to drink, but to control viscosity. Thicker liquids like oils or honeyed water flowed slower and more predictably, especially in colder months. Imagine that, adjusting your timekeeping by brewing special clock water. Not exactly what you'd expect from one of the first civilizations. The priest lifts the jug and fills it again from a larger vessel nearby. The stream gurgles briefly, and then the drip resumes. Plop, plop. You ask what happens when the water runs dry. He shrugs. You refill, or you blame the apprentice. Turns out, there's always an apprentice nearby. A young boy, no older than 12, sits in the corner with his second tablet, quietly copying the priest's notes. His job is to double-check every mark, every drip. If he misses even one, well, no one's going to exile him to the desert, but he might get reassigned to latrine duty for a week. The ancient world was big on creative consequences. Here's the fascinating thing. Unlike the sundial, which only works during the day, water clocks ran all night. Temple rituals, night watches, royal baths, everything that happened after sundown relied on clepsydras to keep schedule. Even the stars got their timing from these dripping jugs. In a way, the clepsydra was the heartbeat of Babylonian time. Slow, steady, and always there. You reach out and touch the edge of the stone basin. It's smooth, worn from centuries of fingers and water and sun. There's a groove along the rim, likely carved by a long-dead craftsman who never imagined someone like you would be here, thousands of years later, appreciating his anonymous handiwork. The priest taps the jug lightly, listening to the tone of the drip. It's slightly off, and he frowns. He pulls a reed from his belt and pokes it delicately into the spout, adjusting the hole size. The drip corrects itself. You realize, in that moment, that keeping time wasn't passive. It required attention, calibration, a relationship. These priests didn't just read the hours, they tended them, like gardeners of passing moments. And the clepsydra? It was their watering can. Suddenly, you're hit with a strange thought. What if time isn't something we obey, but something we maintain? Like a fire, or a garden, something that can be kept well, or let fall into neglect. That thought lingers as the priest gestures for you to rise. He tucks the tablet under his arm, offers you a faint smile, and says something you don't quite catch, but it sounds like a farewell. You leave the shadowed basin behind and step back into the heat of the courtyard. The gnomon is still there. Its shadow now huddles at its base, thin and still. You've seen the two faces of Babylonian time now, the visible and the hidden, the light and the drip. And you're starting to suspect that in this ancient city, time wasn't just measured. It was lived. By early afternoon, the city is humming like a beehive under a magnifying glass. Sunlight pours down in waves, bright enough to bleach the color from clay bricks and melt the edges of distant rooftops into a shimmer. Somewhere, a boy is chasing a goat that absolutely does not want to be chased, and a distant drumbeat announces something you don't understand but feel might be important. You're now walking beside the priest again, though walking may be generous. You're mostly wilting forward, while he remains annoyingly unfazed. He leads you down a narrow alley between two temple buildings, the walls so close you can trail your fingers along both sides. It smells of baked earth, damp cloth, and faintly, very faintly, something sweet like dates. Or maybe sun-roasted figs. He pushes aside a heavy woven curtain and steps into what feels like another world. Cool, dark, quiet. The room you enter is massive, carved stone floors and vaulted ceilings that trap the shadows like secrets. Thin slits high in the walls let in just enough light to paint gold-edged shapes on the ground. But the real surprise is at the center, a stone circle elevated on steps with a narrow staircase spiraling up the inside. It looks like a temple, but not the worshipping kind. This one whispers purpose, not praise. This, the priest says, is where we listen to the sun. He's not being poetic. This, you realize, is the inner sanctum of the ziggurat, the high temple tower. But instead of gods and statues, you see windows and channels designed to funnel sunlight in exact angles, landing on specific stone markers at certain times of day. You follow him up the tight staircase, spiraling into the rising heat. The air gets thinner, drier. Your footsteps echo. Your thighs begin a long, wordless protest. At the top, the priest opens a wooden shutter, and a precise beam of sunlight cuts through the air like a sword, straight, unwavering, and blinding. He waits, and then gestures. You step into the beam. It lands directly on a raised stone disc set into the floor. Around are carved circles and small figures, stylized representations of the gods, phases of the moon, and symbols for stars you don't recognize. "This is noon," he says, and indeed, it feels like noon. The sun is directly above. The light is harsh, but pure. Your own shadow has all but vanished, huddling under your feet like it's embarrassed to be seen. Here's the thing. Noon wasn't just a time. In Babylon, noon was a moment of cosmic alignment. When the sun stood straight above the temple, it was as if the sky and earth were speaking directly. No filters, no delays. A divine handshake. Some rituals had to be performed precisely at this hour, or not at all. And here's your well-known historical fact. Babylonian noon was crucial for their astronomy. Many of their star charts and calculations began from this 0 point, a kind of celestial reset button. If the sun wasn't exactly where it should be at noon, something had gone wrong with the calendar, or worse, with the heavens. The priest picks up a long rod, metal-tipped, probably copper, and gently points it through a hole in the wall behind you. The beam lands on a tiny crystal embedded in the opposite wall. The alignment is so perfect you swear time itself just clicked. Then he smiles. Not bad for a Tuesday. That's your gentle joke. Even ancient priests needed to break the tension sometimes. He walks over to a side shelf and retrieves a thin clay tablet. You can barely see the lines. It's covered in hundreds of tiny marks. Solar alignments, star paths, hour indicators. This was the temple's master dial, the big cosmic cheat sheet. They'd been recording these solar alignments for generations. And no 2 years were exactly alike. In fact, historians still debate whether this was the first true calendar correction system. The Babylonians noticed, ages before Julius Caesar did, that a solar year wasn't exactly 365 days. So they adjusted, sometimes adding whole months, just to keep the seasons from drifting too far off track. That's right. These shadow readers and water drippers were also math nerds with better calendars than most empires that came after them. He hands you a small stylus. "Your turn," he says. You pause, then carefully, hesitantly, press the stylus to a soft clay slate and mimic one of the sun's landing points. The mark you leave is crude, slightly crooked, and probably useless. But the priest nods anyway. "You've recorded noon," he says, as if you've just etched something into history. You suddenly feel the full strangeness of the moment. A modern soul, marking ancient light, on a slab of clay that might outlive you both. You wonder how many hands have made that same mark before. How many times noon has struck on this same circle. And how many times it's gone unnoticed by people too busy rushing to somewhere that couldn't wait. You look up. The sunbeam has already shifted. Noon is gone. Just like that. Outside, the city pulses on, carts squeaking, sandals slapping, someone yelling about figs. But up here, it's quiet again. Like the whole ziggurat took a breath, held it for that one moment of alignment, and now exhales. You follow the priest down the spiral stairs, each step cooler than the last. The echo of your descent, a slow return to the world of sound and dust and living clocks. But you'll remember this moment. The hush of high noon in a stone tower, the precise kiss of sunlight on ancient stone, and the sense, just for a flicker of time, that you had touched the edge of something cosmic. You're back on the ground, but you carry that quiet, sunlit feeling with you. It's a strange sort of peace, like your insides have been dusted off by ancient light. But down here, life keeps happening. A woman passes with a basket of onions on her head, humming a tune older than your language. A scribe yells at a boy for smudging a tablet. Someone sneezes, and a goat answers. You turn down a wide path leading away from the ziggurat and toward the river. The ground softens underfoot as the clay gives way to sandier earth, still warm but more forgiving. Along the way, you pass more of those curious circular carvings in the dirt, time maps, they call them. Crude sundials made by everyday people who didn't have access to ziggurats and crystal-aligned noon beams. You stop beside one. It's no more than a stick jammed into the dirt with small stones arranged in a half circle around it. You bend down, squinting at the shadows. And that's when it hits you. This is geometry. These weren't just spiritual tools or divination circles. They were proto-scientific instruments. Each angle, each arc carved into the ground, corresponds to the shifting position of the sun throughout the day. Not just hours, fractions of hours. One of the farmers nearby sees your interest. He limps over, wiping his brow with the edge of his tunic. "Not bad, eh?" he says with a toothy grin. 2 parts before the high hour. You realize he's using a local version of the time. Not priestly terms, but something more homegrown. 2 parts, a third of the way to noon, give or take. Here's your quirky tidbit. Babylonian farmers didn't always care about hours. They measured time in how long it took to dig an irrigation ditch, or how fast a shadow moved across the length of their ox cart. Practical time, useful time, shadow-based, yes, but also sweaty, dusty, sunburned time. The farmer pokes the stick to realign it. He shrugs. Kids knock it over. Then he adds, without looking at you, "Used to be my father's stick." There's a history there, unspoken but thick in the air. You realize that this, too, is part of how Babylonians measured time. Not just by shadows or drips, but by generations. One person's tool becomes another's. One rhythm passed down to the next. He points to a smoothed-out space beside the dial where faint symbols are scratched into the dirt. A lion, a crescent moon, something that might be a palm tree. You ask what they are. "Calendar," he says, "for the big rains. And for marriages." He laughs. "Sometimes same day." You file that under details to revisit and continue on your way. Soon, you reach the riverbank. The Euphrates glides by, slow and sure. It's not the cleanest water you've ever seen, but it pulses with life. Tiny boats drifting along, children splashing at the shallows, women filling clay jugs in rhythmic, practiced movements. But you're here to see something specific. You spot a small platform built out over the water, a wooden scaffold shaded by a patchy cloth awning, where a pair of priests are tending to something curious. Another clepsydra, but this one's different. Instead of a drip filling a bowl, it's using river current to control the rate of flow. A hollowed gourd is slowly sinking in a jar, water pulled through a narrow reed tube that dips just beneath the river surface. "This one," says a younger priest, "reads the river's mood." You blink. Is that metaphor? Sort of. Turns out, the rate at which the Euphrates flows isn't constant. It shifts by season, by rainfall, even by the gods' alleged tempers. And some temples built their water clocks to account for those moods. Faster flow, faster hours. Slower flow, more time to nap. This system wasn't used for sacred timing, but for prediction. The river's pace told them when to plant, when to expect flooding, and occasionally when not to bother showing up for temple duties. It's a kind of time-weather hybrid, and it feels oddly modern. Historians still debate whether this was truly a timekeeping method or more of a symbolic gesture. Was the river clock accurate, or just an excuse to let nature dictate their schedules? One theory suggests it was deliberately vague, reinforcing the idea that not even the gods ran on a strict schedule. Time could be flexible. The young priest offers you a chance to watch the gourd drop. It's slow, agonizingly slow, but eventually, it disappears beneath the surface with a soft blurp. "That's one," he says. "One what?" He shrugs. "Depends. Helpful. But the point isn't clarity, it's continuity. Whether through sun or water, shadow or flow. The Babylonians didn't care about absolute precision. They cared about harmony. Time wasn't a whip. It was a companion. Sometimes a frustrating one. Sometimes generous. Sometimes indifferent, but always present. You sit on the edge of the platform for a while, legs dangling over the water, listening to the reeds sway and the gentle slap of current against wood. There are no bells, no countdowns, just the unhurried rhythm of an ancient river and a people who somehow managed to build empires, calendars, and poetry without ever hearing a digital alarm. You watch another gourd begin its slow descent, the tube hissing softly as water is drawn in. One more moment measured. One more hour passed, quietly, gently, like a breeze through reeds. You wake the next morning in a borrowed corner of the temple. Some kind of guest alcove filled with straw mats, a faded tapestry, and what you're pretty sure is a statue of a frog wearing crown. The air is still cool, not yet scorched by the coming day, and the light that filters through the reed shutters is soft and golden. You stretch, groan, and instantly feel the ache of walking too many stone steps and crouching beside too many time-measuring sticks. But you're up, and today, the priest wants to show you something more abstract. Come, he says without greeting. You've seen how we mark hours. Now see how we think about them. Which sounds like the beginning of a philosophical TED Talk, but you follow anyway. He leads you not to a temple, but to a school, a scriptorium for scribes in training. The courtyard here buzzes with quiet intensity. Young men and boys hunched over clay tablets, styluses scratching away in tiny, precise strokes. There's an occasional thump as a frustrated student slams a poorly molded tablet to the ground. So yes, even in 1700 BCE, homework was a universal struggle. A teacher sees you approach and waves you in. He's older than the others, his beard more gray than black, but his eyes sharp. Outsider, he asks. You nod. He gestures to a low bench. You know time by shadow and water. But can you read time? You're about to respond when he places a tablet in your lap. On it, rows of tiny wedge marks, some arranged in groups of 3, others in strange, almost decorative spirals. He taps a few with his stylus. This, he says, is a record of 5 days. Shadow length, water level, star position. And then he says the wildest thing yet. And dream content. You blink. Turns out, Babylonians didn't separate timekeeping from astrology or even psychology. The temple schools trained scribes to track everything that happened in a day. Sun angles, moon phases, omens, dreams, bird calls, even a number of figs eaten before someone got sick. Because they believed that time wasn't just measured, it was storied. Here's your quirky tidbit. A real Babylonian record once included the phrase time of high shadow. Man dreamed of goat with 2 heads, harvest delayed. That's not a joke. That's historical data. In a world where gods could speak through shadows or sheep intestines, nothing was too weird to write down. The teacher begins pacing. Each hour, he says, has a personality. First hour is cautious. Third is ambitious. Sixth is dangerous. Ninth is forgetful. You raise an eyebrow. Forgetful. He shrugs. Many scribes miswrite at 9th hour. We blame the hour, not the scribe. Which brings us to your well-known historical fact. Babylonians divided day and night into 12 parts each. That's 24 segments. Sound familiar? Their sexagesimal base 60 system laid the groundwork for our modern hours, minutes, and seconds. So when your microwave blinks 0:59, thank an ancient Mesopotamian mathematician. The priest who brought you here gestures toward a large clay wall map. It's like a timeline, curved into a spiral. Each layer represents a different type of day. Holy days, market days, festival days, mourning days. Symbols mark what times are auspicious, when not to make deals, when to avoid baking, when to pray facing west. And here's the twist. The spiral map repeats. Every few months, it loops back, but slightly shifted, as if time, to them, didn't move in a line but in a coil. Historians still debate whether this spiral calendar was metaphoric or literal. Some think it was used to predict celestial events. Others believe it reflected a cultural view of cyclical fate. That time always returned, just never quite the same. As the lesson wraps up, the teacher hands you a small token, a broken-off fragment of tablet etched with a single wedge mark. 1 hour, he says. Yours. You carry it in your palm as you leave the courtyard, its rough clay warm against your skin. 1 wedge, 1 hour. It feels absurd, symbolic, heavy. You realize, to Babylonians, time wasn't just something to be tracked. It was something to be named, shaped, remembered. They didn't merely live in time. They lived with it. You wander back through the streets, past vendors shouting over melons, and perfume sellers hawking tiny flasks of jasmine oil. A boy darts between carts, laughing, a long shadow trailing behind him like a cape. You pause. It's the 9th hour. You forget what you were about to do. Of course you do. The priest finds you again just as the sun begins to lean westward, its heat loosening its grip on the day. His robes are slightly dustier now, and there's a smear of what might be ink or possibly grape juice on his sleeve. He doesn't comment on your clay-stained hands or the slightly dazed look you're wearing after your brush with Babylonian time psychology. Instead, he simply says, "It's time to climb again." You groan a little louder than you mean to. He smiles, the kind of smile that says, "Yes, I know you're sore, but this next part's worth it." This time you're heading up the outer stairway of the ziggurat, a long zigzagging ramp that wraps around the tower like a lazy serpent. It's less claustrophobic than the inner staircase, but the sun is in your eyes and the wind is picking up, catching the edges of your robe like it's trying to fly you like a kite. Halfway up, you stop to breathe and to admire the view. The city of Babylon sprawls below in an organized chaos of clay roofs, rooftop gardens, and narrow alleyways like veins between houses. You can make out the Euphrates glinting in the distance, meandering past tiny reed boats and slow-moving cattle. In the middle of it all, the great temple complex stands like a heart, beating out rhythms measured in shadow and water. The priest gestures ahead. Come on. Sunset waits for no one. You reach the top just as the sky begins to change. The golden heat of day is softening into amber, and long shadows are stretching again. Those same shadows that greeted you on your first morning here. But now, they feel different, familiar. Waiting for you on the ziggurat summit is a circular stone platform marked with lines radiating outward like sunbeams frozen in rock. But this isn't just another sundial. This one is aligned with the stars. Time begins with the sun, the priest says, but it belongs to the stars. The platform, you soon learn, is part of the Babylonian star calendar, an early astronomical tool used to track the movement of constellations and predict seasonal shifts. It's not about hours anymore. It's about nights, months, years. He points toward the western sky, where the first hints of twilight are cooling the horizon. One by one, stars begin to appear, first faintly, like shy guests at a banquet, and then brighter, more confidently. The priest traces a familiar shape in the air. You know this one, the bull, Taurus. You nod, and just like that, you're standing with someone who stared at these same stars 4,000 years before you did. Here's your well-known historical fact. Babylonian astronomers were among the first to divide the sky into the zodiac signs we still use today. Not just for horoscopes, but to predict seasonal events, agricultural cycles, and even the outcomes of wars. These were scientists wrapped in priestly robes, scribbling math in cuneiform and reading patterns from the sky like bedtime stories for the universe. And here's your quirky tidbit. One Babylonian text claims that the planet Venus was actually the ear of the goddess Inanna, and that when she disappeared from the sky, it meant she'd gone down to the underworld to negotiate with the dead, which, to be fair, is still a better explanation than retrograde motion. The priest picks up a thin rod, bronze probably, and lays it across the platform. As the first star aligns with a marked groove, he presses a small bell. A soft ding echoes across the empty summit. That, he says, was sunset. You didn't even notice. The sun has slipped away like a clever thief, and now the sky is blue glass over ink. Historians still debate how much of Babylonian star tracking was math and how much was myth. Some scholars insist the alignments were precise enough to rival later Greek models. Others argue that the charts were more symbolic, designed to maintain ritual order, not astronomical truth. But here's what you realize, sitting there under the early stars. Both can be true. They measured the heavens, yes, but also their place in it. You lie back on the stone, arms behind your head, and let the stars roll into view. The priest says nothing now. Neither do you. Above you, the constellations begin their quiet procession. No fanfare, no announcements, just 1,000 points of ancient light, each one a whisper of time, so vast, you can barely wrap your sleepy thoughts around it. And yet, here in Babylon, someone did. They counted, they recorded, they dreamed with eyes wide open. And in doing so, they gave us something we still hold today. The idea that time isn't just something that passes. It's something you follow. You exhale. The wind is cooler now. The stars are brighter. The city below hums on. But up here, there is only night and breath and the slow, steady ticking of the heavens. You don't come down from the ziggurat that night. Not entirely. Instead, the priest offers you a thin blanket and a stone bench nestled in a sheltered alcove near the top, half shielded from the breeze. The stars are fully out now, no longer suggestions, but declarations. They shine like they've been waiting all day just to be noticed. You lie there, cheek against cool stone, and above you, the constellations drift. Slowly, patiently, the kind of movement that makes minutes feel like mist. You begin to understand why the Babylonians gave the stars such names, such power, such reverence. When you live under a sky like this, unpolluted, untamed, uncrowded by satellites and city lights, it feels like the universe has something to say. And the Babylonians? They were listening, not just for beauty or poetry, though there was plenty of that, but for timing, for patterns, for signs that things below were tied to things above. Sometime past midnight, the priest wakes you with a nudge. He's crouched beside a large stone slab that you now see is a star map, a flat, circular chart etched with dozens of small figures, lines, and dots. Some of the stars match the sky above. Others don't. These are for different seasons, he whispers. Different years. We track where they rise, when they fall. How long they sleep beneath the horizon. He traces a finger across the edge of the map. There, he says. Sirius. You call it that. We call it the Arrow Star. And then he gives you a look that says now things are getting serious. Because while you've seen time measured by light and shadow, by dripping water and sundial lines, the real masters of time were the stargazers. Here's your well-known historical fact. The Babylonians kept detailed astronomical records for over 1,000 years, tracking celestial bodies with such accuracy that later Greek astronomers like Ptolemy relied on their data centuries later. They charted eclipses, comets, planetary retrogrades, all without a telescope or even glass. And your quirky tidbit, one Babylonian tablet records that Mars acted strange, slowing in the sky and appearing to move backward. The scribe's conclusion? The god of war has paused to reconsider. You imagine Mars looking slightly sheepish. Historians still debate how much of Babylonian astronomy was tied to divination. Were the star charts meant to predict actual events, wars, famines, births, or were they ritual tools, a way to make sense of a chaotic world through patterns and precision? What's clear is that to them, the sky was a scroll, and they were scribes of its unfolding story. You peer over the priest's shoulder as he matches tonight's stars to the ones on the chart. He moves with calm certainty, barely glancing up. His memory of the heavens is so precise it borders on unsettling. He mutters the names under his breath, most of which sound like nicknames for gods. The boar's eye, the sickle flame, the dove who doesn't sleep. Then he stops, taps one mark gently. The Watcher Star, he says. It's bright, near the horizon, and just beginning to rise. It only appears this late, once every 12 cycles, he adds. It marks the changing of the priestly hour. You sit up. Apparently, there are hours beyond hours. Once the sun is gone, and the water clock's too slow to be trusted, and the night stretches long, the stars take over. These late watches of the night are assigned not by minutes or drips, but by the rising of particular stars. Each one signals a new phase. Time to wake the next priest, time to refresh the incense, time to begin prayers for the morning light. It's not that they didn't know how long these star hours lasted. They did, roughly, but it wasn't the length that mattered. It was the order. The priest points to a small bell hanging on a crooked beam. When the watcher's star rises, we ring. That's when the next watcher begins his round. Sure enough, a younger priest steps out from the shadows and silently takes his position on the platform, looking out toward the river, the city, and the slowly shifting stars. No one speaks. No one even nods. It's not a change of shift. It's a passing of a moment. And suddenly, you understand something deep and oddly comforting. To the Babylonians, time wasn't a river. It wasn't even a wheel. It was a choreography, a dance of stars, water, and shadows. A series of entrances and exits, of gongs and drips and aligned beams of light. Each moment had its own role, its own costume, its own step. You lie back again, head now resting on your folded tunic, eyes full of ancient light. Somewhere far below, someone stirs a fire. You smell smoke, human, warm dates. Up here, only stars, only time, only the rhythm of a world that never rushed, but always moved. The next morning begins not with a rooster crowing or a clang of bells, but with the soft slap of sandals on stone and the hush of wind weaving through the ziggurat's top level. You're already half awake, having drifted in and out of sleep beneath a sky that refused to turn off. The stars were like thoughts that never stopped. Beautiful ones, slow ones. A priest walks by and gently places a small bowl beside you. Barley porridge, warm and sticky, with a few raisins sunk like treasure in the middle. It's not glamorous, but it tastes like comfort, like the kind of breakfast that's watched more sunrises than you have. You eat slowly, watching the morning light creep across the horizon. Another day has begun, and with it comes another way to measure it. The priest beside you gestures downward. We've watched time from above, he says. Now it's time to see how we record it. He leads you down the ramps, past the now familiar corners of the temple, and into a long hall that smells of clay, oils, and worn papyrus. The walls are lined with shelves, and those shelves are lined with tablets. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Each one is no bigger than a small book, though most are chipped, cracked, or worn around the edges like old teeth. This is the archives, and it hums with an eerie kind of silence. Not the emptiness of a tomb, but the deep quiet of accumulated knowledge. You're introduced to the head scribe, a wiry man with ink-stained fingers and eyes like sharp flint. He's probably the kind of person who corrects grammar in his dreams. But he seems pleased to have an audience. Time, he begins, is only as real as the marks we leave behind. He pulls a tablet from a cubby and places it in your hands. The cuneiform etchings are shallow, but deliberate, like someone was whispering through clay. This, he says, is a record of eclipses from 72 years ago. The moon swallowed the sun. Everyone panicked. Chickens stopped laying eggs. One man tried to marry his goat. He deadpans that last part, and you're not sure if he's joking. You hope so. Here's your well-known historical fact. Babylonian scribes recorded astronomical events in such detail that modern scientists have used their records to confirm ancient eclipses, planetary movements, and even rare celestial alignments. Some of these clay tablets are essentially time-stamped reports from thousands of years ago, astronomical black boxes. But the next tablet he hands you isn't about stars. It's about bread. Specifically, how many loaves were offered to the sun god Shamash during the 10th hour of a solstice ritual. Here's your quirky tidbit. The Babylonians believed that bread offered at the wrong time might confuse the gods. There's even a record of a priest being scolded for placing honeycakes before the altar a full 3 drips too early. 3 water clock drips. That's how tightly they timed divine snack delivery. Historians still debate how strictly these ritual timings were enforced. Was it just for symbolic order? Or were priests genuinely terrified of being smote by poor timekeeping? Some think the detailed records were as much bureaucratic obsession as they were spiritual devotion, an early form of holy micromanagement. As you continue through the archives, the scribe shows you tablet after tablet. A log of sunrise positions over a 6-year span. A daily ledger of market openings, tied to the sun's peak. A note about a shepherd who insisted the moon had moved too fast and blamed it for losing a sheep. You smile. It's easy to forget when discussing ancient civilizations that these were people, with jokes, worries, late mornings, and weird sheep problems. But time mattered to them not because they were obsessed with punctuality, but because they believed time shaped fate. You ask if all of these tablets were ever read again after being filed. The scribe gives you a look. They're not for us, he says. They're for those who come after. And suddenly you get it. These aren't just notes. They're messages in a bottle. Clay letters sent forward into a future they could barely imagine. A future where someone, maybe even someone like you, would sit here dusty and awestruck, holding a piece of their yesterday in your very real today. You leave the archives changed. There's something about holding time in your hands, literal time, not just the metaphor, that lingers. As you walk back out into the sun, the priest joins you. You've seen our clocks, he says, but now you know the secret. You glance over. What secret? He shrugs, but there's a glint in his eye. That time is only real if someone remembers it. The sun is higher now. The city is waking up again. Carts beginning to roll, children starting to shout, shadows getting ready for another long, hot performance across the courtyards and walls. You glance at your shadow, long, narrow, bending toward the west. It stretches beside you like an old friend, one you finally understand. By midday, the air has gone soupy again. Babylon in the heat is less a place than a condition, somewhere between sweating and steaming. The streets smell like sun-warmed figs, dust, and the faint, acrid breath of bronze smiths hammering under canopies. You're half-melted yourself, walking alongside a group of apprentices sent to fetch incense and scrolls. The priest is nowhere in sight, which is odd, because he usually appears just when you think you're finally unsupervised. But today, you're handed off to someone else, a temple administrator. Now, don't yawn. He may look like an accountant, and his tunic may be unervingly clean, but this man holds a secret that reshaped Babylonian time. And as he guides you into a long, shadowed hallway off the temple's southern wing, he gestures toward a heavy cedar door and says, "You're about to see what happens when time gets difficult." That's either ominous or exciting. You're hoping for both. He opens the door with ceremony, and inside, you find what looks like a giant game board carved into the stone floor. Circular patterns, wedges, and symbols are arranged in strange clusters. There are counters, small clay discs, each painted with marks. Some are resting. Others are mid-move, as if frozen mid-thought. This, he says, is a calendar regulator. You blink. A what? He kneels beside it and starts shifting one of the discs slightly to the left. We track the moons, the sun, the stars, but none of them follow rules exactly. The year doesn't line up with months. Festivals drift. Crops refuse to care about sacred days. He chuckles. Time resists obedience. So we nudge it. Here's your well-known historical fact. Babylonian scholars used intercalary months, entire extra months inserted into the year, to keep lunar and solar calendars in sync. When a moon cycles, roughly 354 days, started slipping too far from the solar year, about 365.25 days, they toss in a 13th month like a cosmic shim to balance everything out. And they didn't do it at random. Oh no, they had committees, serious men in dark corners arguing over whether planting season was early, or whether the goddess Ishtar would be insulted by a festival falling out of season. Which brings us back to this room. This floor map is where they played out time. Each disc represents a month. The symbols track omens, harvests, and weather. And occasionally, the administrator admits with a smirk, arguments. Some years, we added the wrong month, he confesses. Put a feast before famine. The gods didn't seem to mind, but the farmers sure did. Here's your quirky tidbit. One year, a miscalculated calendar led to two separate New Year's festivals, spaced just 40 days apart. Some scribes insisted it was a bonus blessing. Others quietly wrote angry tablets about excessive feasting. Historians still debate just how consistent Babylonian timekeeping really was. Some evidence suggests each city had its own calendar variations, like ancient time zones, but weirder. Imagine trying to plan a caravan delivery when Borsippa insists it's still month 9, but Uruk is already halfway through month 10. You kneel beside the administrator and touch one of the discs. It's cool, heavy and worn smooth at the edges, moved by countless hands over countless years. This isn't a clock. It's not even a calendar in the way you think of one. It's more like time as a puzzle, a thing to be assembled, interpreted, adjusted. He looks at you and says, "We didn't just measure time. We argued with it. And sometimes we won." That might be your favorite line so far. He leads you out of the chamber and into the shaded hallways again. You're quieter now, not because you're tired, though you definitely are, but because something's starting to settle in. Time isn't fixed. Not here. Not then. Not now. It bends. It stumbles. It waits. It skips. And the Babylonians, those sun watchers, star readers, water measurers, chose to meet it halfway. Not control it, not chase it, but negotiate with it. Like an old friend who sometimes lies about when the party starts. You step back into the brightness of the outer courtyard and shield your eyes. The sun's begun its slow descent. Longer shadows, warmer colors, the city shifting into its early evening rhythm. Another day nearly done. Another segment of the cosmic game board nearly played. And as the temple bell rings softly in the distance, marking the 10th hour, you find yourself smiling. Not because you know what time it is, but because now you know what time means. You're sitting now beneath the low awning of a stone archway, legs stretched out, a clay cup of something that tastes vaguely like fermented plum resting in your hand. It's early evening, what the Babylonians would call the sinking hour, when the heat finally loosens its grip and even the flies begin to move more slowly, if they move at all. The courtyard is filled with soft chatter, sandals shuffling, and the kind of breeze that feels more earned than given. A child walks past with a water jug balanced on her head. Behind her, two scribes are having an animated discussion, each waving a tablet like it's about to fly off. You don't catch the words, but you catch the tone. It's something to do with what day it actually is. Apparently, the calendar disagreement isn't just a priestly pastime. It's a city-wide sport. Just as you're beginning to lose yourself in the rhythm of the evening, the priest appears again, holding a small wooden box. He sits beside you without a word and places the box between you. Then, with a quiet click, he opens it. Inside are seeds, dozens of them, carefully sorted, nestled in little clay compartments, each one labeled in tight, sharp cuneiform. You glance at him, eyebrows raised. "This," he says, "is the other kind of time." You tilt your head. "Planting time," he explains, "the one that doesn't care what the sun says or what the stars are doing. This time lives underground." It sounds poetic, but it's also practical. Babylonian agriculture, like everything else, was tied to time, but not clock time, not even calendar time exactly. This was seasonal rhythm, shaped by rainfall, soil warmth, and the stubborn will of wheat. And for farmers, the stars weren't just pretty lights, they were signals. The rising of specific constellations marked the opening and closing of agricultural windows. Here's your well-known historical fact. The Babylonians used the heliacal rising of stars like Sirius and the Pleiades to signal planting and harvesting times. When a certain star appeared just before sunrise for the first time that year, it meant the soil was ready. The stars were calendars before calendars were cool. The priest pulls out a larger seed, barley, you think, and places in your hand. "Don't look at it like food," he says. "Look at it like a clock, one that grows." You turn it over in your palm. It's rough, dry, barely heavier than a crumb. But it's also alive. Potential paused. Time waiting to start. He tells you about lunar agriculture charts, simple diagrams that matched moon phases to planting dates. Some temples swore by them. Others dismissed them entirely. Historians still debate whether these charts were based on actual outcomes or simply spiritual tradition. Some records suggest they work surprisingly well. Others imply they were more about pleasing the gods than growing good onions. Either way, the moon held sway, not just for tides or festivals, but for the things that fed you. Here's your quirky tidbit. One Babylonian farmer once recorded on a tablet that he planted lentils under a waxing moon and they grew rebellious. Whether that means they sprouted early or staged a full revolt remains unclear. You imagine an uprising of lentils, just for fun. The priest reaches into the box again and pulls out a small tablet. This one's different. It's not a record. It's a talisman, etched with a symbol that looks like a star atop a hill. For favorable cycles, he says. Farmers carry them. They believe it reminds time to be kind. You ask if he believes in it. He smiles. Time doesn't need to be reminded. But we do. That lands somewhere in your chest. Because maybe that's what all of this has been about. Not controlling time, but learning to notice it. Noticing when it begins, when it shifts, when it softens, when it fails, and most of all, when it returns. He gives you one of the talismans. It's warm from his hand. You tuck it into your satchel like a secret. As the stars begin to emerge again, first faint, then clearer, you look up, instinctively now, searching for the familiar shapes you've come to know. The bull, the arrow star, the watcher. But tonight, you notice a new one. The priest points, seeing your gaze. The farmer's lamp, he says. It flickers just before the planting season begins. It's barely visible, just a whisper of light near the horizon. But it's there, and with it a new kind of time begins. Not tracked by sundials or clepsydras, but by soil and breath and the quiet certainty that things will grow again. You lean back against the stone archway, clay cup now empty, stars crowding overhead. And in your palm, that seed, waiting, measuring. You're walking now at the edge of the city, where buildings give way to fields, and the air smells less like incense and more like dust and earth and something green trying to grow in spite of it all. It's early morning again, the kind of pale quiet that makes you feel like the world hasn't fully woken up yet, and maybe won't if you walk softly enough. Your guide today is a farmer, not a priest, not a scribe, not someone who's ever climbed a ziggurat or whispered to a star. He's barefoot, bareheaded, beard full of crumbs. But his fingers are quick, and his eyes are sharp, and his voice is the kind of soft that could still shout if needed. He waves you over to a flat patch of land with shallow trenches etched into the dirt. At first, it just looks like someone dropped a comb and dragged it through the soil. But then you notice the shadows. Long, finger-like shadows, cast by small vertical posts set into the earth at precise intervals. This, he says, is my hour garden. You raise an eyebrow. Not for growing, he adds, for knowing. And just like that, you've discovered another kind of clock. Not for cities or priests or astronomy, but for the farmer's body. Here's your well-known historical fact. In Babylon, rural workers often used local, improvised sundials, sticks in the ground, stones aligned with the morning's light, shadow lines drawn in ash or chalk. These tools weren't regulated by any temple or royal decree. They were deeply personal, often based on how long it took to hoe one row of beans or walk to the edge of a barley field and back. The farmer crouches beside a post, pokes at the shadow with a thin reed, and nods. 2 hours past first light, he mutters, "Time to move the goats." You ask how accurate it is. He grins. Accurate enough to not miss supper. He shows you how the shadow length changes with the season. In summer, the posts have shorter shadows. In winter, the same spot throws a shape long enough to scare children. He's memorized them all, like a calendar written in shade. And here's your quirky tidbit. One ancient Babylonian proverb warns, "A man who follows the city's hour dies hungry in the field." Apparently, time in the countryside had its own opinions. You watch him trace a small arc in the dirt, marking where the next shadow will land. Then he whistles, and a boy appears, no older than 10, carrying a goatskin water bag and a suspicious look. It's his son. He takes one glance at the shadow, nods, and disappears toward the hills. You teach them young, the farmer says, or they think time lives in clocks. You both laugh a little at that. He walks you past the fields next, patches of green in organized rows, each at a slightly different stage of growth. The wheat's high, the beans are flowering, the cucumbers are sulking, as cucumbers always do. He points to small markers at the edge of each field, etched stones, each with a tiny wedge symbol and a scratchy glyph. Some have small holes bored through them. They look like leftover game pieces. Seasoned stones, he explains, placed at the time of planting. When a shadow hits the hole, you know it's near harvest. No bids, no alarms, just the sun, a stone, and a hole. Historians still debate how widespread these shadow stones were. Some argue they were regional oddities. Others believe they were everywhere, just too humble to make it into the grand temple records. After all, clay tablets survive. Worn field stones? Not so much. You follow the farmer to a small hut shaded by a thatched roof. Inside, it's cool and smells of smoke and honey. He reaches into a jar and pulls out what looks like a weathered, blackened clepsydra. A water clock, yes, but unlike the polished temple versions. This one is charred, cracked, repaired a dozen times over. Belonged to my grandfather, he says. Used it during the drought year. Said it saved the orchard. You ask how. He points to small notches carved into the inside of the bowl. Measure how much time between irrigations. Keep it regular, even if the rains don't show up. And suddenly it makes sense. Even out here, water still told time. Not to honor the gods, but to keep trees alive. You sit with him a while under the eaves. He chews something that might be fennel. You chew something that definitely is not. City folk, he says finally, think time comes from the sky. We know better. You look at him. Where does it come from? He grins and taps his chest. From here, for what you remember. From what you feel when the goats get restless and the beans stop growing. Time, he says, is the rhythm of work. The music of doing. And as the sun dips behind the far ridge and shadows stretch long again across the fields, shadows that now make sense, now carry meaning, you find yourself nodding. Not because you understand everything, but because you started to listen to time the way Babylonians did out here. With your body, with your feet in the dirt, with a shadow cast by your own stillness. And in that quiet, you feel it again. The soft tick not of gears, but of growth. The long hour not of clocks, but of life. Later that evening, you're back in the city proper. Feet sore, skin sun-warmed, and your brain pleasantly overloaded with more ways to track time than any one person should ever be allowed to know. You're starting to feel like a walking clock yourself, ticking softly with every new thing you learn. The priest finds you again near the edge of a bustling marketplace. He's in slightly more casual robes now, if such a thing exists for priests. And for the first time, he's carrying a musical instrument, a kind of long-necked lute with a hollow gourd body. It looks ancient, even by Babylonian standards, and vaguely like it may once have doubled as a weapon. Tonight, he says with a lopsided smile, we measure time by sound. You blink. You mean like music? He nods. Sort of. Rhythm, pulse, breath. Timing by repetition. And just like that, you're swept into a corner of time you didn't even know existed. The kind you feel instead of see. The audible clock. Not measured by stars or sand, but by fingers on string and voice in air. He leads you to a small temple square, where a circle of musicians and priests has gathered. The air is warm and close, scented with myrrh and dust, and filled with a quiet hum of expectation. Someone hands you a drink. It tastes like spice-date wine and possibly regret. Then the music begins. Soft at first, just a single rhythm, plucked from the lute's strings like water, drops falling on stone. Then a second player joins in, drumming gently on an upside-down pot. The sound is hollow, regular, hypnotic, like a heartbeat outside your body. A third priest begins to chant, not words but tones, rising and falling in slow patterns. You don't understand the meaning, but the rhythm pulls at something deep. You find yourself tapping your fingers without meaning to, rocking slightly, and that's the point. Here's your well-known historical fact. The Babylonians used music and rhythmic chanting as part of timekeeping during rituals and ceremonies. Certain festivals required prayers or sacrifices to be performed at precisely timed intervals, measured not by water clocks, but by musical sequences. Essentially, time was counted in songs, but it wasn't just religious. The priest leans in. Work crews chant too. Farmers, bakers, even boatmen. It's easier to pull or stir or dig when you all move the same. He's right. Rhythmic chanting wasn't just spiritual. It was practical, a kind of ancient metronome for labor, for rituals, for life. And here's your quirky tidbit. One Babylonian song preserved on clay tablet is believed to be a bread-making chant. The rough translation, Need fast, need slow. The gods won't bless a lazy dough. Imagine a temple choir baking sourdough on divine time. As the music deepens, the square fills with more people. Some are clapping softly, others simply swaying. And without realizing it, you've passed an hour, maybe more, but no bell rang, no shadow moved. The water clocks stay dry. You only knew time passed because the rhythm changed. Historians still debate how formal these musical time measures were. Did each chant have a precise tempo? Were rituals lengthened by accident if someone played too slowly? One theory suggests temple musicians trained for years to maintain exact pacing, using breathwork and heartbeat as internal clocks. And here you are, experiencing it yourself. Your own breath syncing with the drum. Your thoughts stretching to the tempo. Your sense of time slipping, not lost but entranced. The priest leans back, cradling the lute now silent in his arms. Time isn't always something you chase, he says. Sometimes it's something you ride. The chant winds down. The drumming fades. And for a moment, the square is silent again, but not empty. It's filled with the echo of minutes counted not in ticks or drips, but in sound waves and silence. You sit still for a long time, watching the last of the players pack away their instruments. The sky overhead is turning navy now, the first stars returning like shy guests. The same stars you realize that the farmer waited for, that the scribe recorded, that the priest watched rise behind a bell. But tonight, the stars don't feel like clocks. They feel like notes in a song you've only just started to hear. You leave the square slowly, feet moving to a beat that still thrums in your ribs. A beat that, even now, you're measuring time against. The city feels different at night. Not just quieter, though it is, but deeper, older, like it's settling into itself after pretending to be modern all day. The bricks seem warmer. The alleys are darker. And somewhere beyond the rooftops, a drum echoes faintly, probably from that same priest you left plucking his ancient lute like it owed him something. You're walking alone now, past low clay buildings and shuttered shops, the air thick with the scent of oil lamps and hot stone. It's the kind of evening that makes your thoughts slow down, stretch out, and ask you annoying questions like, what time is it really? And how do you know when a moment ends? You turn a corner and find something strange. A stone bench beside a shallow pool of water, lit by a flickering torch. It's quiet here, too quiet. And for a moment, you think you've stumbled into some secret priestly ritual you weren't invited to. Then a familiar figure steps out from the shadows. It's the old scribe from the archives, the one with the ink-stained fingers and the stare that could edit a sentence just by blinking. I thought you might wander by, he says, not unkindly. People always do around this hour. You sit. There's something comforting about the bench, and something vaguely ominous about the fact that it's exactly your height, as if carved for you long before you ever got here. I've been thinking, you start. Dangerous habit, he says, folding his arms. Time is tricky enough without people getting reflective. You laugh softly. Then he gestures to the water. What do you see? You look, and there it is, your reflection, yes, but behind it, stars. The water is so still, so perfectly framed by the stone, that it's become a mirror of the night sky. As you watch, one star flickers, then another. This, he says, was once a temple of time. You blink. The pool. He nods. We used to bring the young ones here, not to teach them about clocks or calendars, but to show them that time is also perspective. You lean in. There's time that moves forward, he continues. That's the time you count. But there's also time that loops, repeats. Time you only see when you stop trying to measure it. Here's your well-known historical fact. The Babylonians believed in both linear and cyclical time. Their calendars tracked yearly cycles, agricultural seasons, festivals, rituals, and these weren't just repeated out of tradition. They were believed to renew the world. Time wasn't just passing. It was resetting. The scribe picks up a stone and drops it into the pool. Ripples blur the stars. Your reflection vanishes. Then, slowly it returns. Moments pass, he says, but meaning stays. You sit in silence for a while, trying to feel that idea in your bones. You think back on everything you've seen. The sun casting shadows like blades, the water clocks dripping truth, the stars gliding with purpose, the farmers planting by light they didn't even see. And you realize something. You've been thinking of time as a tool. But here, beside this quiet pool under this tired city sky, you begin to wonder if time is less like a ruler and more like a lantern. Not something to control, but something to follow through the dark. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some Babylonian myths describe time as a servant of the gods, a quiet figure who walks ahead of fate, holding a torch, showing the path but never looking back. In one tale, the figure trips and chaos enters the world. So really, even time has bad days. Historians still debate whether these metaphors were poetic flourishes or deeply held beliefs. Were they ways to explain the unexplainable? Or did the Babylonians truly see time as a being, walking, watching, lighting the road ahead? You like the thought. The scribe rises slowly, stretches, and mutters something about his knees being older than his favorite stars. Before he leaves, he turns to you and says, "Time isn't a question. It's a direction. Walk in it wisely." You nod. You're not entirely sure what that means yet, but you know you'll think about it. Later, you lie back on the stone bench, hands folded behind your head. The torch flickers gently beside you. The pool is still again. The stars shimmer, reflected twice. Once above, once below. It feels like you're floating between them. And maybe, just maybe, that's where real time lies. Not in the clocks, not in the stars, but in the space between your breath, where the world stops trying to hurry you and simply waits. The next morning, a rooster somewhere in the neighborhood decides that your dreams are over. He's wrong, of course. You were already awake, lying under a linen blanket in the guest corner of the temple, listening to the slow stirrings of a city that measures its mornings with ritual instead of rush. The priest appears right on cue, carrying two things: a clay cup of something warm and bitter, and a bundle wrapped in reeds. He hands you both. "You've learned time from above," he says, "and below. Now you'll carry it." You unwrap the bundle to find what looks like a folded cloth, but when you spread it open, it's covered in rows and rows of tiny dots, lines, and symbols, meticulously painted in red and black ink. "A pocket calendar," he says. "Not a sundial, not a star chart, not a water clock, but a guide to the weeks, the festivals, the planting moons, and the market days. Something a traveler or merchant might tuck into a satchel and consult between cities. Something that says, you may not be home, but time still follows you." Here's your well-known historical fact. The Babylonians developed lunisolar calendars that were portable and practical. Merchants, scribes, and priests used tablets, scrolls, and cloths marked with symbolic dates. The original planners, filled with warnings like bad luck day or favorable for marriage, depending on the lunar position. The priest points to a red mark shaped like a fish beside a crescent. "That one," he says. "Don't travel by boat. Bad currents." The moon and the river god argue on that day. You raise an eyebrow. They argue. He nods solemnly, then winks. You wouldn't like them when they're arguing. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some Babylonian calendars marked certain days with a tiny hand symbol, warning, "Do not speak loudly." These are thought to be days when the gods were in a bad mood. Yes, even the divine needed quiet time. The calendar is more than just cute symbols and mythological metaphors, though. It's a record of observation, one refined over centuries. The rising of Sirius, the waxing of the moon, the appearance of strange weather patterns. Each symbol is tied to a season, a star, a story. "Take it," he says. "Learn what kind of time you carry with you." You roll the cloth up carefully and tuck it into your satchel. It feels like you've just packed a little piece of Babylon itself. Historians still debate whether these calendars were intended for the average citizen or strictly for temple use. Some believe they were widespread, common enough that even artisans and shepherds had access to them. Others think they remained elite tools, passed down like sacred recipes among the scribes. Either way, one thing is clear: time was personal, not just measured but lived. You follow the priest out into the street, where the city is now fully alive. Market stalls opening, children weaving between carts, and old men arguing about something that sounds suspiciously like which hour the bread was actually baked. He takes you to a small rooftop garden above the western wall, where the breeze carries the scent of coriander and something vinegary. It's quiet here, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like a guest in your own body. You sit, you breathe, you pull the cloth calendar out again, and trace the symbols with your finger. It's strangely satisfying, like the dots and curves are little keys to memories you haven't lived yet. And that's when the priest says it. Time, he begins, isn't only something you observe. It's something you interpret. You glance over, like art. He nods, or like weather, or dreams. There are patterns, but no guarantees. You look back down at the calendar. There's a section near the bottom with symbols you haven't seen before. Stacked lines that resemble waves, beside a dot inside a circle. That one, the priest says, following your gaze. That's a pause day, a day to do nothing. You grin. Finally, he grins back. Even the gods took naps. And suddenly, something clicks. All this time, literally all this time, you've been learning how the Babylonians track the hours, the stars, the seasons. But this cloth, this strange, quiet object, it's not about when things happen. It's about how to live while they do. You roll the calendar back up and slip it away. A tool, a guide, a whispered reminder. The priest leans back and closes his eyes. And for once, no one is trying to measure anything. No drips, no shadows, no chance. Just a breeze, the rustle of leaves, and the sound of time, resting. You wake again before the sun does. This time without any help from roosters or chanting or mysterious scribes appearing in doorways. There's a chill in the air, not the kind that bites, but the kind that wraps around your ankles like a quiet suggestion. Go somewhere. Do something. Learn more. The priest greets you on the temple steps, but this time he's not alone. Beside him stand a young woman, maybe your age, with streaks of soot on her arms and a leather apron tied around her waist. Her hair is pulled back in a knot so tight it could hold a scroll. This, he says, is Tamatu. She's going to teach you about mechanical time. You squint. You mean like gears? Tamatu smirks. You'll see. She leads you through narrow alleys to a quieter part of the city. No carts, no goats, no spice merchants shouting about cumin like it's life or death. Here it's just workshops. And inside one, something unexpected. A wall lined with pulleys, levers, hanging weights, and most notably, a large wooden frame containing what looks like a rotating cylinder with pegs and tiny scoops. What is that? You ask. She steps forward, pulls a cord, and water begins to trickle into a small upper container. Slowly, the cylinder starts to turn. It's called a time wheel, she says. My father made this one to measure temple duties during the long night festivals. And just like that, you've stumbled upon a forgotten branch of Babylonian ingenuity. Here's your well-known historical fact. While most Babylonian timekeeping was based on shadows and water, there's evidence that basic mechanical devices, including geared water clocks and weight-regulated timers, were used for ceremonial timing and possibly astronomical observation. They were rare, experimental, and mostly lost to history, but they existed. The wheel turns, and small weights attached to pegs begin to drop into bowls, creating a gentle clink, clink, clink. Tamatu explains that the intervals between drops were designed to sound an alert, a kind of ancient alarm. This one's not for hours, she says. It's for tasks. When the fourth weight drops, you're supposed to change the incense. When the seventh drops, you recite the next verse. You lean in. So, it's musical time? She shrugs. Rhythmic. Responsive. The gods didn't like to be rushed. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some ceremonial devices were designed to release a small puff of scented smoke at specific intervals during long prayers. A temple priest once wrote that if the smoke came early, it meant the gods were impatient, and you should talk faster. Tamatu walks you through the construction, how each peg represents a delay, how the water flow must be constant, but never too fast, how the weights must be identical, otherwise the timing is off. And here's where things get philosophical. You think time is precise, she says, but it's really just a series of guesses, well-managed guesses. You laugh. Isn't that what clocks are? She grins. Exactly. Fancy guesses with gears. She invites you to try resetting the device. You fumble with the pegs, spill some water, and almost knock the whole thing over, but she just nods approvingly. Better than my cousin. He managed to set fire to a drip bowl. You smile, but something deeper is sinking in. This isn't just an ancient machine. It's an admission, a quiet truth. We've always tried to hold time in our hands, and time has always slipped through. Historians still debate how widespread these mechanical tools were. Some argue they were one-offs, built by curious minds like Tamatu and her father. Others believe temple engineers had entire departments dedicated to them, early precursors to the clockmakers of Greece, Persia, and Rome. You sit beside the device as it continues its slow, deliberate clicks, each one marking not just time, but effort, the patience it takes to shape a peg, the care it takes to measure drip, the faith it takes to believe a scoop of water can control a moment. Tamatu hands you a thin stylus and a piece of clay. Your turn, she says. You hesitate, then scratch a symbol, a tiny star, rising over a curved line. Your own moment, marked. She nods and places the tablet on a shelf among dozens of others. Each one a timestamp, each one someone's silent conversation with time. And as the wheel keeps turning beside you, the clicks soft as breath, you realize something beautiful. Time isn't just something we pass through, it's something we build with. And in that quiet room, surrounded by wood and water and the warm smell of oil-soaked gears, you don't just understand that. You believe it. You leave Tamatu's workshop with your sleeves smelling faintly of burnt oil and your fingertips still tacky with clay. The streets are quieter now, basking in the pause between morning bustle and midday business. Somewhere in the distance, a donkey brays like it's trying to remember the words to an old song. You're thinking about pegs and drip bowls and the sound of time being built. But before the thought can settle, a boy runs up, panting, shoves a scroll into your hands, and vanishes down an alley like a human comma. The scroll is tied with red twine. You break the knot and read the one-line message inside. The stars are moving. Meet us on the roof. You know exactly which roof. Moments later, you're climbing the winding staircase of the main ziggurat, Babylon's towering mountain of bricks. The priest is already there, along with 3 figures in dark robes bent over long, thin slates angled toward the heavens. One looks up and waves you over. This, the priest says softly, is the final clock. You stare at the horizon. Nothing's moving. And then, just barely, a pale shimmer of light crests above the rooftops. Not the sun, not a star, something in between. The planet Venus. One of the astronomers murmurs. She rises early today. Here's your well-known historical fact. The Babylonians were among the first to track planetary motion with incredible precision, especially Venus. They kept meticulous records of its appearances, disappearances, and retrogrades, and used these observations to build lunisolar calendars, predict eclipses, and even inform decisions in agriculture and politics. You sit cross-legged as a tablet is passed around. It's old, cracked, covered in neat columns of symbols. One column shows the heliacal rising of Venus, the moment it first appears in the morning sky after being hidden by the sun. Another lists bad omen days, marked with little glyphs that look like frowns and flaming arrows. You'd be amazed, the priest says, how much empire building depends on where Venus is standing. The astronomers chuckle, but it's not a joke. Wars were delayed, marriages postponed, even economic decisions waited on Venus. She wasn't just a planet. She was a calendar with an attitude. You squint at the tablet. So this is time too? The priest nods. Not hours or days, but cycles. Time that loops like a rope binding sky and earth. He shows you how they used star charts, rotating tablets, and even long pits filled with water to track stellar reflections and alignments. The system wasn't perfect. Stars drifted, clouds interrupted, but over generations, patterns emerged. Here's your quirky tidbit. One Babylonian astronomer kept a personal diary of every eclipse he witnessed. On one occasion, he wrote that the moon hid its face in shame and refused to come out for 2 nights. He also noted that his dog barked continuously. Both were considered highly significant. Historians still debate whether Babylonian astronomers saw their work as science or magic, or both. The line between data and divinity was thin, if it existed at all. To them, patterns in the heavens were messages, and decoding those messages was the highest calling. You lean back against the cool stone ledge and stare up. Venus is brighter now, hanging low over the rooftops like a silver fish suspended in a bowl of indigo. You can almost hear it ticking, not in minutes or hours, but in phases, appearances, returns, a kind of cosmic heartbeat that pulses slower than anything human, but no less precise. The priest offers you a stylus and another clay tablet. Mark this moment, he says. Write the time, not as numbers, but as what it means to you. You hesitate, then you press the stylus into the clay and etch. The moment the stars stopped being strangers. The priest smiles. That's the kind of time we never forget. As the sky begins to lighten and Venus fades back into morning's haze, the astronomers quietly roll up their slates. No one claps. No one announces the hour. But you know it. Not because of shadows or drips or gears, but because something inside you has shifted. Time has shifted, and now you're part of the pattern. You descend from the ziggurat just as the city begins to stretch and yawn. Shopkeepers rolling open their stalls, dust rising with the sun, and the smell of bread drifting through the alleys like a promise. You're still carrying that tablet, the one where you wrote, "The moment the stars stopped being strangers," and it's heavier than you expected in all the right ways. But your mourning isn't over. The priest meets you again. Of course he does, this time near the riverbank, where the Euphrates curls like a lazy serpent through the edge of the city. He's barefoot now, robes hitched up just enough to reveal shins that haven't seen sunlight since the last lunar eclipse. You've learned time from the sky, he says. Now let's talk about time that floats. You glance at the river. That a metaphor? He chuckles. Everything's a metaphor when the river's involved. You follow him to a dock where a small reed boat waits, bobbing gently. A boy, maybe 10, maybe ageless, stands at the stern holding a long pole. His expression is the precise midpoint between serene and annoyed. You climb in. The priest follows, and the boy, without a word, pushes you off into the current. The city slips away behind you. What remains is motion. Soft, continuous, measured not by ticking or dripping or chanting, but by flow. Here's your well-known historical fact. The Babylonians used river travel extensively, not just for trade and transport, but also as a method of timing rituals, especially those that followed lunar cycles and seasonal floods. Some temples even had timed water journeys, in which sacred objects were ferried downriver over the course of a day to align with planetary positions. You pass a floating shrine, its painted eyes watching you in silence. The priest nods toward it. That one's aligned with the rising of Mars. When its shadow touches the far shore, the priests begin the incense prayers. You blink. You're using river shadows to track time? He grins. The river tells us when. We just pretend to listen closely. And you start to see it. The water is full of reflections, of sun, of boats, of birds, and those reflections move just slightly as the current pulls them. Priests stationed along the banks use fixed poles and marked reeds to track those movements. A shadow that lands here at high sun will land there 3 hours later. It's like watching liquid sundials. Here's your quirky tidbit. One particularly poetic priest wrote that the river wears time like a robe, shedding at each bend it turns. That same priest was reportedly banned from festivals for being excessively metaphorical. Historians still debate how deliberate this river-based timekeeping was. Was it a true method of chronometry, or just a poetic overlay on a practical necessity? Some argue it was symbolic, more performance than precision. Others believe it played a real role in shaping the cadence of temple life. The boy pulls gently, keeping you in the slower current. The ride isn't fast, but it's measured. You pass familiar markers. A tree with a broken branch, a statue worn smooth by rain, a curve in the bank that cradles the wind just right. Each landmark, the priest explains, is part of a ritual circuit. Sacred boats drift from point to point, arriving at the temple dock just as a star crests or a shadow crosses a threshold. It's not perfect, but it's close. It's not about exactness, he says. It's about alignment, making sure the river's time and the temple's time touch. You watch the water curl around the pole. So the river is a clock? He shakes his head. The river doesn't tell time. It is time, and now you feel it, not just hear it. The river's tug, the gentle pressure of passing moments, uncounted but undeniable. It's the sensation of being carried, the complete surrender to something ancient and continuous. You think about the water clocks, and the sun's blade, and the sound of a weight dropping into a bowl. And now, a current that pulls and doesn't care if you're ready or not. You reach over and drag your fingers through the water. It's cool, alive, a little defiant. Like time, the priest leans back, hands folded on his stomach, and sighs. This, he says, is how I know I'm still in the story. You look at him. The river, he explains, always flows forward. But if you watch closely, the reflections go both ways. You sit with that, let it ripple through you. And as the boat nudges gently into a small dock near the temple's southern gate, you step out feeling less like a passenger and more like a participant, like someone who didn't just ride through time, but traveled with it. You step off the boat with your sandals soaked and your thoughts somewhere deep beneath the surface of the Euphrates. The river lingers on your skin, cool and slow, like time that refuses to hurry just because people expect it to. As you walk, the priest beside you is humming softly, a rhythm that doesn't match your steps but feels like it should. You pass by the southern gate, then turn sharply into an alley of unusual silence. It's lined with clay ovens, loom sheds, and a strange, rhythmic clacking sound, like bone against stone. This, he says, is where time gets woven. You raise an eyebrow. You mean literally? He nods toward a narrow doorway, where 3 women sit at large, vertical looms. Their fingers move so quickly it feels like they're conducting an invisible orchestra. The priest steps back and lets you approach alone. You edge closer. The oldest woman looks up and smiles. You've come to learn thread time, she says. You nod, unsure what you're agreeing to. She gestures for you to sit and hands you a spindle. It's rough, uneven, clearly used 1,000 times. She pulls a small strand of wool and begins to spin it between her fingers. This, she murmurs, is how the old women kept time before priests got clever. Here's your well-known historical fact. In Babylonian households, weaving and textile production were deeply intertwined with timekeeping. Not with clocks or calendars, but with process. You measure a morning not by shadows, but by how much thread was spun or how far a pattern grew on a loom. Weaving was both labor and measure. A finished tunic might take 10 moons. A ceremonial sash, 20 sunsets worth of thread. You spin awkwardly. The spindle wobbles. One of the women chuckles. Don't worry, she says. Even the gods drop their first threads. You grin and try again. Here's your quirky tidbit. Babylonian midwives sometimes used woven string to count contractions during childbirth. It's believed some homes had birthing braids, multicolored cords with knots to measure timing and pace. Time woven, quite literally, into life itself. Each thread, the eldest weaver says, is a line of time. She points at the loom's stretched warp, hundreds of tight vertical lines, waiting for the weft to dance through them. Your day lies there, she says. Not in the sun, not in the sky, in the thread you finish and the mistake you notice too late. And now you see it. The loom is a timeline. Each row, a unit. Each pass of a shuttle, a moment captured. Each pattern, a memory. And if you make a mistake, the weaver sighs, then smiles. We fix what we can. We hide what we can't. Historians still debate whether these looms were used in formal temples or remained domestic tools. Some believe certain patterns were coded messages, time spells woven into ritual cloths. Others think that's romantic nonsense. But when you see the care in each knot, the rhythm in each row, it's hard not to believe something sacred's been spun into the threads. You ask the youngest weaver how she tracks her day. She shrugs. By feel. How long is a morning, you ask? 3 rows of careful tension. How long is a sadness? Sometimes half a belt. She laughs softly, but a joy can take a whole tunic. You weave a few awkward rows of your own. It's crooked, uneven, but real. And when you hold it up, they all nod. Not because it's good, but because it's yours. A small fragment of the day. A piece of time woven into existence. They give you a strip of cloth as you leave. A time ribbon, they call it. It's thin, patterned with stars and waves. Each twist, each shift of color, they say, marks a change in the sky. They tell you to wear it during travel, so you never lose your place in the rhythm of things. You tie it around your wrist. It feels like a reminder, not of what time is, but of how it moves through hands, through patience, through craft. As you step back into the sunlight, the priest joins you again. So he asks. You look down at your ribbon, and you say, I think I just met the softest kind of time. He smiles. Good. You're almost ready. By now, you've grown used to the way the city folds itself around you. The way Babylon doesn't seem to teach so much as reveal, one layer at a time, like papyrus unrolling under a breeze. You've measured time with stars and shadows, gears and gods, thread and chance. You're starting to suspect the Babylonians could measure time with soup if you gave them 5 minutes and a strong onion. The priest, as usual, finds you before you can wander off. Today, he says, we visit the most dangerous timekeepers of all. You blink. Let me guess, merchants? He gives a slow, satisfied nod. Exactly. You follow him into the central market, where the sun hangs high and hot over rows of canopies strung with silk, herbs, amphory, and every spice your nose can't pronounce. The sound here is rhythmic chaos, bargains shouted, animals braying, deals struck with slaps and laughter and suspicious winks. The priest points to a stall near the corner, where a man with ink-stained hands is counting coins with the focus of a man conducting brain surgery. That's Nabatu, he says. He keeps time in debt. You hesitate. Is that metaphorical time? No, he replies. That's calendar-based interest. You approach the stall. Nabatu greets you with a nod and gestures to a scroll covered in tight columns of writing and numbers. I'm a lender, he says, unrolling the parchment. And this is my sundial. You lean closer. Each row shows a name, a loan amount, and a series of marks. Some look like stars, some like crescents, others like triangles. Due dates, he says, measured by lunar phases and feast days. People pay on the 3rd moon after barley is planted, or the 5th after the last eclipse. Here's your well-known historical fact. The Babylonians used complex calendrical systems for accounting and loans, often tied to lunar cycles, harvest seasons, and temple festivals. Interest was calculated per month, not per year, and defaulting during an inauspicious moon could bring not just shame, but divine suspicion. They trust the moon more than the king, Nabata mutters. You glance around the market. Time pulses here, not in drips or ticks, but in cycles of need and return. When merchants set repayment dates, they don't say 3 weeks. They say on the 2nd moon after the grain comes in, or when the god of storms quiets his voice. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some Babylonian debt contracts were written on clay in 2 copies, one kept by the lender and one buried in a temple courtyard so the gods may enforce repayment. Essentially, divine escrow. Nabata shows you another list, this one etched into a wax tablet. It's not financial, it's delivery schedules. Beer for the soldiers, olive oil for the priests, honey cakes, seriously, for the astrologers, all marked by phases of Venus and festival days. People don't ask what time it is, he says. They ask what time means. Historians still debate how ordinary citizens navigated these calendars. Some believe professional timekeepers, like Nabatu, handled the calculations, while others argue that knowledge of the lunar cycle was as common as knowing the weather. A Babylonian teenager, they say, could estimate the date by the shape of the moon and the smell of ripening dates. You buy a honey cake for science and sit beside a shaded fountain, watching the flow of people. Everyone here, in their own way, is measuring time. The boy counting figs on a basket, hoping they'll sell before dusk. The woman bartering spices, knowing the monsoon is late this year. The old man sleeping in the shade, waiting for nothing except the slow arc of the sun to reach his feet. You realize something. This is living time. Time not tracked but breathed, eaten, earned, owed, forgiven. The priest sits beside you, holding 2 small clay tokens. Temple coin, he says, handing you one. It buys 2 loaves or 1 question answered poorly. You laugh. What if I want a good answer? He leans in, half smiling. Then you wait. You tuck the token into your satchel beside the time ribbon, the water-worn tablet, and your scribbled calendar cloth. Your collection is growing. But more than that, it's deepening. Each artifact, a reminder, time is everywhere, but never quite where you expect. And as the sun edges westward, casting long shadows over baskets of lentils and copper tools, you understand something else. Even in the market, with its noise and chaos and clinking scales, time is sacred. It's just wearing sandals and arguing over the price of garlic. You're sitting in the shade of the fig vendor's awning, sticky fingers dusted with honey cake crumbs, when the priest appears again. At this point, you're no longer surprised. He's like the human version of an ellipsis, always arriving just when the thought isn't finished. Time to leave the market, he says. You groan, but I just figured out how to measure a fiscal quarter by the smell of overripe pomegranates. He doesn't laugh, but his eyes twinkle like someone who's storing the joke away for later use. He gestures for you to follow, and soon you're winding through narrower streets, past quieter homes, where dried herbs hang like sleepy wind chimes from doorways. The sounds of the market fade, replaced by whispers and the rustle of parchment. You've arrived at the scribe's quarter. This, he says, is where time is preserved. A boy greets you at the threshold of a low clay building, his fingers black with ink, his tunic permanently smudged. Inside, the room is warm and lined with shelves packed, not with scrolls, but clay tablets, some no bigger than your hand, some the size of bricks. One scribe, bent over a fresh tablet, is muttering numbers. Another dips a stylus into a bowl of dark liquid and begins writing with a rhythmic, almost musical motion. Careful, the priest whispers. They're grumpy when you interrupt the rhythm of thought. You tiptoe toward the nearest shelf. The air smells like dust, oil, and knowledge that desperately needs a nap. Here's your well-known historical fact. Babylonian scribes recorded time meticulously, not just dates and festivals, but weather, celestial movements, debts, omens, dreams, and mundane events. These cuneiform tablets, often baked into permanence, formed one of the oldest systems of recorded history and chronological tracking. One tablet catches your eye. It's labeled with a date written in wedge-shaped symbols, followed by a list of events. Moon full, market flooded, fish carts overturned, temple goat escaped again. You read it aloud. A nearby scribe snorts. That goat keeps messing with the priest of Ishtar. I think it's personal. You laugh. But then the priest gently takes the tablet from your hands and turns it over. On the back is a neat line of symbols. A star, a crescent, and 3 dots. He points. That's not a date. That's a sequence. An early attempt to log the order of events, not just their occurrence. The beginning of chronology as we know it. And suddenly you see the shift. Time here isn't being measured or celebrated. It's being captured, filed, labeled, recalled. The scribe beside you offers a tablet he just finished. It's a weather report. Wind from the east. Sandstorm expected. Don't wear linen. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some Babylonian tablets contain dream logs time-stamped with astrological markers, like the night of the waning moon under Scorpio. These were submitted to temple archives and interpreted as messages from gods, or indigestion. The two were often confused. Historians still debate how accurately these time logs match real-world events. Some scholars believe the chronological system was more symbolic than precise, stories organized by narrative flow, not fixed date. Others argue for a remarkably sophisticated system, including event correlation across regions. You ask the scribe what happens if someone forgets to record an event. He frowns. Then the event never happened. You blink, but it did. He shrugs. Not if it's not written down. Time fades without memory. The priest leans close. That's the thing, he murmurs. They didn't just record time. They gave it permanence. They turned moments into objects. Time became durable. You run your hand along a row of smooth, ancient clay. Hundreds, maybe thousands, of moments, all waiting to be remembered. Time that refuses to be forgotten. You ask if you can write one. A scribe hands you a wet tablet and a stylus. You think, then you press into the clay. A day of stars, threads, water, and whispers. Time flowed around me. I did not drown. The scribe glances over your shoulder, nods, slides the tablet onto a tray. It's filed under soft clocks and river logic, he says with a smirk. And you feel it again. Not just learning about time, but living in it, leaving a mark on it. Outside, the sun leans lower. Another shadow grows long across the alley. And somewhere in the archives of this city, baked, shelved, and silently waiting, your moment now lives. You leave the scribe's quarter with the faint smell of clay still clinging to your hands. The priest walks beside you in comfortable silence, letting the echo of all those written moments settle like dust between you. For a while, neither of you speaks. And then, like someone turning a page, he says, "There's one more keeper of time you haven't met yet." You nod. Let me guess, he's got a beard, a riddle, and a sundial tattooed on his face. The priest doesn't laugh. She lives in a cave. Well then, you follow him out past the city walls, where the buzz of Babylon gives way to a hush thick with bird calls and cicadas. The road turns to a path, the path to packed dirt, and finally to a slope of rock that curves into shadow. The air here is cooler. Still, she doesn't keep time like the others, he says as you step through the opening. She remembers it. Inside the cave, it takes your eyes a moment to adjust. Then you see her. An old woman, hunched but not frail, sits on a woven mat surrounded by bowls of polished stones, dried plants, faded feathers, bones carved with symbols, and, of course, a small flame, flickering in the hollow of the cave wall. She looks at you without blinking and says, "Time is not a line. It's a knot. Sit." You sit. Here's your well-known historical fact. Ancient Mesopotamian spiritualists, especially those associated with healing or divination, often saw time not as linear, but cyclical and layered. They believed that past, present, and future were interwoven, accessible through dreams, symbols, and ritual storytelling. The woman picks up a bowl of smooth stones and tips them gently onto a cloth. They scatter with soft clicks. She studies the pattern. "Ah," she murmurs. You're tangled in a question. You try to smile. "That's fair." She begins to tell a story. Not one you know, but one you feel like you've heard before. A child lost under an eclipse. A mother who counts time not in days, but in footprints. A god who speaks only in thunder, and only when ignored. It goes on like that. A dreamy, spiraling tale where beginnings and endings don't bother with order. And you realize something. This isn't storytelling for entertainment. It's navigation. You're not being told a story. You're being walked through a map. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some Babylonian oral traditions use symbolic objects, like feathers, beans, or colored string, to accompany stories. These were arranged in patterns during the telling, as mnemonic aids or ritual cues. It's a kind of story clock, where each item marks the unfolding of time through narrative. She reaches for a bone carved with a zigzag line. "Hunger," she says, "or a river, or both." The priest leans toward you and whispers. She's not being metaphorical. She means it might be a literal hunger, or the kind where something important is missing. Historians still debate whether these rituals were practical, religious, or psychological. Were they medicine, magic, metaphor, all of the above? The truth, it seems, is as slippery as river light. You ask the old woman what time it is. She raises an eyebrow. "Time," she says, "is the story that hasn't finished telling itself yet." Then she hands you a piece of woven string, a braid of black, gold, and soft gray fibers. "This is your place in it," she says. "Your loop. Tie it to something that matters." You take the braid. It's warm, somehow. Not physically, but with weight. With meaning. Outside, the sun is low. The priest helps you climb back up the slope, but you stop once to look back at the cave. Just for a moment. The flame flickers at the mouth of it. The kind of flicker that makes you wonder whether it's the wind or something older. Something watching. You say, "She remembers time." The priest nods. She also feels it. And now, so do you. You feel time not as a sequence, but as a presence. A layered, circling rhythm that repeats but never bores. A pattern that sometimes pauses, sometimes coils, and sometimes loops back around just to say, "See, you were here all along." You walk back into Babylon as twilight drapes the city in its slow blue hush. The priest doesn't say much, only offers you a fig from a pocket you're not entirely sure he has. And the two of you eat in silence while the torches along the city gates flicker to life, one by one. By now, you've learned to listen differently. Not just for sounds, but for rhythms. The gentle syncopation of footsteps. The clatter of amphorae being stacked for the night. A child's laughter echoing between stone walls like a question you don't need to answer. The priest finally breaks the quiet. Let's visit the one place where no one measures time. You blink. I'm not sure that exists. Oh, it does, he says. It's called sleep. He leads you past the temples, past the markets, past even the stables, until the buildings thin and the stars widen overhead. You arrive at what looks like a small garden courtyard. It's quiet, ringed by low walls and moonbright leaves. In the center is a wide, smooth platform of stone, scattered with sleeping mats and fragrant herbs. A woman sits nearby, stirring a small bowl of dark paste. She looks up and smiles with the kind of gentleness that's been awake far longer than you. "This is where the dream keepers wait," the priest says. You hesitate. Dream keepers? He nods. They track the only time that moves without us. Here's your well-known historical fact. In Babylonian culture, dreams weren't just nightly entertainment. They were serious business. Dream interpretation was an entire field of priesthood, and dreams were believed to hold omens, divine messages, and prophecies. Special temples existed where people could sleep intentionally, hoping for a divine dream, a practice known as incubation. The woman gestures to a mat. You lie down. The stone is cool beneath your spine, and the scent of mint and crushed fig leaves swirls around your face like the beginning of a lullaby. She dips a finger in the paste and marks your forehead with a gentle circle. "The eye of your night," she whispers. You stare at the stars. There are more than before, or maybe they've just gotten closer. She hums softly. No words, just a sound like river reeds moving in wind. Your eyelids grow heavy. Your body slips into stillness. And that's when she begins to speak. Not loud, not directly. She tells a story, but you can't follow it in the usual way. There's no beginning, no middle, only symbols that slide across your mind like shadows. A dog that turns into a bird and flies across 3 moons. A broken cup that sings when it's mended. A tower that falls upward, brick by brick, into the stars. You aren't dreaming yet, but you're close. And here's your quirky tidbit. Some Babylonian dream tablets describe collective dreams. Entire villages reporting the same images, like fire rising from the east or rivers turning black. Scholars argue whether these were shared events, mass suggestion, or poetic invention. Either way, they took it seriously. The woman speaks again, this time near your ear. You can't count time when you're dreaming, but time still counts you. Historians still debate whether dream incubation was psychological therapy, spiritual ritual, or just a clever way for priests to nap on the job. But the practice endured, refined through centuries, because dreams had gravity. Dreams shape decisions. They change lives. You feel your breath slowing. You feel your thoughts folding inward. And then something strange. Not sleep, not waking. A sensation like standing on the shore of a dark lake, watching the ripples move in reverse. The priest's voice comes, very softly now. This is the part of the day you'll never remember clearly. But it remembers you, and you let go. Let time unspool not in hours or phases or chance, but in images drifting, fleeting, alive. You dream of the thread you wove, but it's a river now. The stars move like ink across a clay tablet. Venus opens her arms and laughs. A weight drops into a bowl, but instead of clinking, it sings. And when you wake, not fully, but enough to notice, you realize the night has changed shape. Not just outside, inside you. Time hasn't stopped, but it has softened, become rounder, quieter, more willing to wait. And maybe, just maybe, it dreams of you too. You wake with dew in your hair, and a dream you can almost taste figs, salt, firelight, and something like laughter wrapped in wool. The mat beneath you is warm, though the sun hasn't risen yet. All around, others lie in gentle stillness, their breathing steady, their bodies curled like commas waiting for the next sentence. The priest is already awake, of course, perched on a stone bench, drinking something that steams from a carved wooden cup. He offers it to you, tamarind and date. For clarity, you sip. It's sharp and earthy, like someone boiled time and strained it through a scroll. Do you remember? He asks. You pause. Only the feeling. He nods. That's enough. You walk with him back toward the city. It's still half asleep, caught between shadows and the first hints of gold. And now you notice something. Babylon at dawn is quiet in the most musical way. Not silence exactly, but absence. A held breath. A waiting. The priest stops at a doorway carved with lions and stars. This, he says, is where the keepers of endings live. Endings, you ask. A little early for that, isn't it? He raises an eyebrow. Every day ends. Every festival. Every empire. You follow him through the doors into a funerary archive, but it doesn't feel like a place of mourning. There's light here. Color. Shelves filled with urns, cloth bundles, tiny carved animals, and time boxes, small containers wrapped in symbols. A woman in pale robes greets you, bowing her head. She leads you to a table with an empty tablet and a fresh stylus. We write the end before it comes, she says. Here's your well-known historical fact. Ancient Babylonians had an advanced sense of legacy and remembrance. They recorded genealogies, death rites, and testaments of wisdom meant to be passed down, not just to family, but to the gods. End-of-life rituals often included placing objects and writings into tombs that represented the life's time, not in quantity, but in quality. The woman sets out 3 items before you: a seal jar of oil, a folded square of linen, and a painted stone. Choose one, she says, to represent your day. You hesitate, then reach for the linen. She nods. The weaver's cloth. And suddenly you understand. This isn't about death. It's about marking the closing of a cycle. Not with grief, but with attention. She teaches you to write a closing line, just one. Something that says, this happened. I was here. This moment was real. You press the stylus to clay. I saw time breathe. I did not turn away. She smiles, takes the tablet, and places it gently inside a hollow wall, alongside hundreds of others. You've closed this part, she says. Now you can open the next. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some Babylonian burial sites include time charms, tiny discs or amulets etched with lunar phases or shadow lines. These weren't meant to measure time after death, but to remind the soul of time's passing, in case it forgot how to move forward. Historians still debate whether these death rituals were standardized across classes. Some argue only the elite received such careful symbolic closure. Others suggest even modest households followed these customs, perhaps in simpler form, but no less meaningful. The priest leads you outside. The sun is rising fully now, light catching on rooftops and the tips of ziggurats like the city is blushing into consciousness. You feel lighter, not just awake, but whole. You've learned how they watch time, tracked it, measured it, remembered it, wove it, felt it. Now, you've seen how they let it go, and not just with sadness, but with ceremony. The priest offers you a second time ribbon, this one thinner, dyed a smoky purple with flecks of silver. For the endings, he says, because those deserve color too. You tie it beside the other. 2 loops now, one for the journey, one for the release. And as the city stirs behind you, you realize something you hadn't expected. You stopped asking what time it is, because now you know where you are in it. The city is wide awake now, stretching into the day with a kind of practiced grace. Children chase each other through courtyards. Laundry ripples like sails between rooftops, and the bells of temple kitchens clink like silver rain. You walk through it all with the quiet certainty of someone who's no longer trying to keep time, but simply walk with it. The priest is humming again, something low and familiar, though you're sure you've never heard the tune. He leads you past a row of clay workshops, then down a narrow staircase into a courtyard where sunlight falls through wooden slats in shifting bands. Here, a man in a smudged tunic tends a series of pendulums made of copper, stone, and even dried pomegranates. This, the priest says, is the city's first unofficial time lab. The man looks up. Time isn't official. It's observed. He invites you closer, showing you a device where a polished stone swings slowly on a long string, casting a narrow shadow onto a marked board beneath it. The marks aren't ours. They're moods. Steady, agitated, sleepy, thoughtful board. Let me guess, you say. You measure emotional time? Exactly, he says, grinning. Everyone forgets that time has texture. Here's your well-known historical fact. While the Babylonians didn't have mechanical clocks, some temples experimented with weighted motion, early pendulum-like devices to test consistency of intervals for rituals, especially during long chants or prayers. They didn't yet quantify time in seconds, but they were beginning to ask, what is duration? The man shows you a bowl of thin sand being slowly poured through a hole in its base. Time is flow, he says, but sometimes it hesitates, and sometimes it rushes. This helps us notice the difference. He holds up two bowls side by side. Same hole, same sand. One drips smoothly. The other glugs in irregular bursts. Same amount of time, he says, but one feels longer. And suddenly you see it. This isn't about astronomy or calendars or shadows. This is about subjective time. How a single moment can stretch or shrink depending on what's in your heart. He gives you a small stone and asks you to hold it in your palm while he starts a pendulum. You stare at the arc, the swing, the curve of return. Then he asks, think of a moment you didn't want to end. You do. The swing slows. Now, think of a moment you couldn't wait to be over. The swing seems faster, sharper. He smiles. You changed nothing, and changed everything. Here's your quirky tidbit. A few recovered Babylonian tablets contain prayers not to gods or stars, but to time itself. One line reads, "Oh, time, stretch where I love and fold where I fear." A personal petition to the rhythm of existence. Historians still debate whether these subjective time rituals were widespread or experimental. Some argue they were philosophical exercises, not actual temple practice. Others believe there was an underground tradition of emotional horology, timekeeping for the soul. The man hands you a pendant made of river glass. Inside, a tiny copper string sways with your breath. For remembering how time felt, he says, you put it on. The priest doesn't speak until you're back outside. Well, he asks. You look down at your pendant, at your ribbons, at your wrist, which now feels less like it's measuring seconds and more like it's wearing stories. I think I finally get it, you say. Time isn't what passes. The priest raises an eyebrow. It's what stays. He nods, satisfied. And somewhere behind you, in a hidden courtyard where pendulums swing and sand hurries and hesitates, you swear you hear someone begin to hum your rhythm back. By now, your pockets hold more than trinkets. They carry evidence. The kind of gentle, impossible evidence that can't be weighed or counted, but makes itself known in how slowly you now walk. In how often you pause to notice the length of a shadow, the sound of sandals on stone, the way your heartbeat seems to sway with the city's own quiet pulse. The priest leads you higher this time, past the walls, up the winding terraces of the ziggurat. Not to the top, but to a ledge where the view stretches like a memory across the plain. You sit beside him. Below, Babylon breathes. The river coils like a silver ribbon through the patchwork of streets and temples. Smoke curls from cooking fires. The chant of a distant ritual drifts up, more like weather than music. The priest doesn't speak at first. He just gestures toward a large bronze disc mounted on a pedestal beside you. It's simple, a flat circle engraved with concentric rings, each one covered in tiny symbols. This, he says softly, is the time map. Not a clock, a compass. You lean closer. The outermost ring is labeled with signs of the zodiac, the next with months, then festivals, then moon phases. The inner ring, dream cycles, he says, and emotional tides. Here's your well-known historical fact. Though Mesopotamians lacked mechanical clocks, they developed multi-layered time systems, combining astronomy, agriculture, religion, and emotion. Some temple tools allowed priests to synchronize events across systems, guiding rituals, harvests, and royal decrees with a near-ritual precision. The priest gently rotates the disk until a symbol, a crescent cradling a star, lines up with a notch. This is where we are, he says. Not a time of day, not a date, a moment, a position within overlapping rhythms of sky and spirit, harvest and habit. It's not about knowing what time it is, he adds. It's about knowing what kind of moment you're in. You blink. So, this is astrology? He shrugs. Or theology. Or poetry. Call what you like. Babylon called it alignment. You sit with that, and it makes a strange kind of sense. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some high-ranking officials were assigned personal moment advisors, priests who tracked their moods, dream cycles, and omens, recommending when to act or retreat. It was like having a life coach, but one who took your sleep position and last sneeze extremely seriously. Historians still debate whether these time maps were actually followed or symbolically interpreted. Some believe they influenced every major decision in the empire. Others think they were more meditative tools, ways to reflect, not dictate. The priest hands you a tiny version of the map, etched on clay, small enough to fit in your palm. He presses your fingers over it, guiding your touch to the star nestled beside the spiral. This is your spiral, he says, where endings fold into beginnings, where you're not done, but also no longer starting. You close your hand around it. You feel it, not just the clay, but the recognition. You're standing, settling, into a moment of time, so layered it doesn't need to be named. The priest looks out at the horizon. Time isn't a path, he says. It's a place. A cloud drifts across the sun. A shadow slips along the bricks beside you. The wind changes direction, like a page being turned gently by the breath of something ancient and kind. You ask, what comes next? He smiles. You already know. And in your hand, the time map warms slightly, whether from your skin or the sun or the sheer quiet truth of it. You can't say. But you believe him. You already know. The descent from the ziggurat is slow, not out of fatigue, but because every step feels like a return. You've been walking for what feels like days or maybe lifetimes across sundials and water clocks, temples and threads, dreams and pendulums, and now you're heading back, though you're not sure to where. Or if the where even matters anymore. The priest doesn't speak. He lets the silence stretch like a hammock between you. And when you finally reach level ground again, he gestures to a narrow doorway. This, he says, is where time repeats. Inside a room, not sacred, not scientific, just familiar. It's a kitchen. A small clay hearth glows in the corner. There are pots, baskets of herbs, and the unmistakable smell of lentils and roasted garlic. An old woman stirs something slowly, deliberately. You recognize the rhythm, not cooking for speed, cooking for memory. She looks up, smiles. You look like someone who forgot how time tastes. You sit beside the hearth. She ladles you a bowl, and with the first bite, something settles inside you. Here's your well-known historical fact. In Mesopotamia, meals weren't just sustenance. They were rituals of repetition. Recipes passed down for generations served as time markers. Certain dishes were made only during specific moons, solstices, or after births and deaths. Food became a clock with flavor. You ask her what's in the stew. She shrugs. A good memory, a bad joke, and a spice no one can name. It tastes like a festival you don't remember attending, but somehow miss. You glance around and notice rows of clay tokens on a shelf behind her. Small, painted symbols, some of animals, others of stars, others still of what might be bread or bowls. She catches you staring. Recipe tokens, she says, from before we wrote things down. Each one a meal. Each meal a time. She hands you one shaped like a fish. New Year's soup, she says. Only made when the river floods and the fish dream in circles. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some Babylonian families used a calendar based entirely on meals. It wasn't official, of course, but common sayings mark the seasons. The lentils are late this year, or we've already had 3 honey feasts. It must be planting time. It was communal timekeeping, flavored with cumin. The priest, quietly sipping his own bowl, nods at the fire. This is what people forget, he says. Time isn't always stars and shadows. Sometimes it's what happens again. The morning tea, the midday bread, the stew that brings the whole house back to itself. Historians still debate whether culinary rituals were structured or improvisational. Some argue for strict seasonal dishes. Others believe families created localized food calendars unique to their lineage or village. You finish your bowl. The old woman hands you a scrap of linen, warm from the hearth. For wiping the bowl, she says, or the past, whichever feels more urgent. You laugh, and now you notice the walls, etched with small carvings, circles, dots, crescent shapes, zigzags. You run your fingers over them. Recipes, she says, but also reminders. You ask, reminders of what? She shrugs again. That no matter how much time changes, we still get hungry. The priest smiles. Time always brings us back here. To food, to warmth, to each other. As you stand to leave, she gives you one last thing. A small pinch of a strange-smelling spice, wrapped in wax cloth. It only works if you forget what it is, she says. You tuck it into your satchel. You're not sure if it's a metaphor, a seasoning, or a spell. And you don't care, because right now, your belly is full, your heart is quiet, and time tastes like home. You step back into the sunlight, your satchel a little heavier with tokens, threads, spices, and, though it weighs nothing, a growing sense that time is no longer chasing you. If anything, it walks beside you now, barefoot, unhurried, smiling with something close to affection. The priest leads you to a quiet square. It's not remarkable, just a worn patch of earth with smooth stones around the edge, and a single tree rising from its center. The tree is not tall, nor flowering, nor grand, but feels older than the city itself. Children are playing nearby, tossing pebbles, drawing loops in the dirt. One of them laughs so hard they fall over, and the others tumble down beside them like dominoes of joy. This, the priest says softly, is the place of unwritten time. You sit beneath the tree. The light filters down in dappled gold, like memory made visible. Here's your well-known historical fact. While Babylonians tracked time with astonishing precision, they also believed in unmeasured hours, times outside of charts and rituals. Moments of play, storytelling, rest. They even had a term for it. Zamarnisu, literally the people's drifting. You watch the children. None of them glance at a sundial. None of them ask what time it is. They know. They're in the middle of now. The priest says, there's a reason no temple stands here. No market. No monument. Just a space where time can breathe without being watched. You lean back against the tree. Its bark is smooth, where thousands of hands have rested. Someone's carved a spiral near the base, still fresh. A young girl approaches. She holds a handful of tiny pebbles, each painted with a dot or line or crescent. She offers one to you. Yours, she says simply. You take it. It's blue, with a single white swirl in the middle. What does it mean? You ask. She shrugs. Whatever you want. She skips away, and you realize this moment, this entire place, is beyond analysis. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some Babylonian households kept bowls of time pebbles by the door. Not for clocks, but for moods. Family members would place a pebble in a pouch as they left for the day to signal how they were feeling. Hopeful, angry, tired, curious. The order of the pebbles at days and helped guide dinner conversations. Historians still debate whether this practice was symbolic, spiritual, or simply decorative. But more than one tablet suggests that emotional rituals were as important as agricultural ones. You close your fingers around your blue pebble. You're not sure what mood it marks. Maybe open-heartedness. Maybe just presentness. The priest settles beside you. No more clocks? You ask. He smiles. Only the kind that tick in your chest. You close your eyes for a moment. Listen. You hear laughter. The rustle of leaves. Your own breath. No bells. No gongs. No chants. Just the hush of things being exactly what they are. You remember the market, the pendulum, the cave, the calendar cloth, the water bowl, the song of sand, the shimmer of oil lamps, the goat that hated the priest of Ishtar, and the story spinning flame in the dream temple. They're not memories. They're chapters. They're layers. They're still here. Still ticking. Still yours. You open your eyes and ask the priest, "Is this the end?" He tilts his head. "Only of this rhythm." You sit quietly under the tree, pebble in hand, satchel full of sacred nonsense, surrounded by children who know more about time than most kings ever will. And you let yourself be part of the moment that doesn't need a name. Because finally you understand. Some of the most important minutes are the ones no one writes down. Night returns gently, as if it's been waiting at the edge of the city all day, slowly folding itself over the rooftops and courtyards like a soft wool cloak. The priest walks beside you once more, though now his presence feels different, lighter, as if he's no longer guiding, but simply accompanying you. You retrace familiar steps, past the water clock temple, past the gardens of woven calendars, past the courtyard where you first saw the sundial stretch its long golden fingers. But nothing feels repetitive. Everything feels earned, lived, folded carefully into your spine. He leads you to one last place. It's a small courtyard shrine, modest, half-forgotten, with only a few oil lamps flickering against its stone walls. In the center sits a circle of smooth, flat stones, each etched with a symbol you've come to recognize. Sun, moon, shadow, thread, bowl, flame. This, the priest says, is where they offer time back. You sit cross-legged within the circle, across from him. The space hums with something not quite silence, more like completion. The kind of stillness that arrives only when everything that needed to be said has been said. He holds out his hand. In it, a small bundle of the threads you've collected, now braided together. River gray, starlight silver, oil black, and sky gold. The ribbon you tied when you dreamed. The one from the archives. Even a smoky one from the end-of-day room. These are your markers, he says. Proof that time touched you, and that you touched it back. You take the bundle gently, tie it around your wrist. Here's your well-known historical fact. In the final stage of many Babylonian rituals, participants would offer their time tokens, stones, threads, drawings, to a fire or river as a symbol of gratitude and closure. But a few were allowed to keep them to remind themselves that they had not only lived through time, but understood it. The priest doesn't speak now. Instead, he reaches into a pouch and withdraws a tiny clay tablet, no bigger than a coin. He presses it into your palm, one word carved into it. Now, you smile, because you finally understand what they knew all along. Time isn't just something you track. It's something you inhabit, something you taste, hear, tie, forget, and remember. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some Babylonian scholars believe that the present wasn't a knife edge between past and future, but a pool, wide and wobbly, where all things briefly float before drifting outward. They called it Iluwadi Nunu the God's Blink. Historians still debate whether this idea ever made it in a mainstream ritual, but it shows up again and again in marginal notes and side tablets. That the now wasn't an instant. It was an experience. You look up at the priest. Well, I remember all of this. He shrugs. Only what you need. And you nod. Because that's enough. The lamps flicker lower. The stars bloom wider overhead. The city breathes, slower now but no less alive. You close your eyes, and as your thoughts quiet, as the day unwinds its last silent threads, you feel the rhythm ease. Like wind settling, like water stilled, like time folding its arms around you and whispering, "That'll do." The night deepens. Each breath stretches longer, like the sigh of ancient stones cooling beneath the stars. The sky above Babylon grows darker, softer, almost woolen in its quiet. The stars no longer sparkle. They hover, still and low, as if watching you with quiet affection. You shift slightly in your seat beneath the fig tree, or the ziggurat steps, or that humble shrine with the lamplit walls, wherever your journey paused, and feel the last threads of wakefulness loosen. Gently, kindly, time no longer presses. It rests. No need to count the minutes now. No need to wonder what comes next. You've seen the water bowls, the sunlit lines, the dream threads, the clocks made of silence. You've lived inside the measurement and outside it. You've whispered with priests and laughed with children who never needed a calendar to feel complete. And now you float. Through memory, through meaning, through the kind of peace that doesn't need to be explained. Let it all settle around you, like cooling embers in a hearth too sleepy to burn. Let the weight in your chest soften. Let the thought of tomorrow fade into something gentle and wide. There is nowhere else to be. There is nothing else to do. You are in the moment between shadows and stars, where time itself closes its eyes for a little while. And in that hush, in that stillness, you sleep